Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Minato gives responsibility of Naruto to Kakashi part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Oh crap. It's moving. 17-year-old Hokage Kakashi stared down at the bundle in his arms without the slightest inkling of what to do. It hadn't moved since it had been shoved into his chest by an ANBU 4 hours ago. It was even quiet as he had conducted his rather one-sided argument with said ANBU, which had ended in Kakashi being forced to, reluctantly, bring it inside what was left of his house. He had then sat with it cradled against his stomach, while it continued to remain motionless. But now it was moving and he was clueless as to what he should be doing. In fact, the hell with that. Why should he be doing anything with it? Why had Sandaime-sama picked him to deal with this mess? Yes, there were obvious reasons. One was that he was 17, old enough to watch out for another living being. Another reason was that the thing he held now was related to him. But right now Kakashi wasn't particularly happy with him. He had understood why it had to be done, of course. Gods, he understood. He was a ninja of Konoha, a jounin. He had killed his first man before he could speak properly. He had killed to protect and killed to survive and killed and killed and killed and killed until there was nothing left, nothing. But that was the problem because he had absolutely no damn clue how to make something live. Even the people he cared about desperately, the ones he would give his soul and drench his hands in blood for, he couldn't make live. The people he would drink the blood of his opponents for, the people he would sacrifice everything for just so they could stay alive, he couldn't protect. So how the hell was he supposed to raise this? What am I supposed to do with you? Kakashi voiced to the bundle. It did not respond, didn't even cry or whatever these things were supposed to do, but it did start shifting again. Its small head twisted back and forth as if it were having its own nightmare. You and me both, the silver-haired man sighed. 24 hours. It was only a mere 24 hours ago everything had gone horribly right. The elite forces of Konoha were losing against the massive chakra and size of the demon fox that had appeared out of nowhere. The regular forces of ninja, genin and chunin that had no place in this battle but also had no choice, were dropping like flies. Kakashi had thrown everything he had and more into the battle to protect the village that was more important to him than anything, to protect the people that were more important than anything, but it hadn't been enough. The damn thing was just too much for all of them, except for one. Kakashi hadn't even known what was going on until it was too late. None of them had. The fool had stood there, staring down at his enemy, and the jounin had been utterly terrified that he wouldn't reach them in time to save the Hokage. The seals they all watched their village leader perform produced nothing, not even an upsurge in chakra flow it seemed, and many of the rookies lost it, yelling that even Sandaime-sama couldn't save them, that they were all lost. Kakashi had no time for such scum and raced toward his former sensei to protect him, but it was pointless. Even though the fox had stopped fighting back, nothing they did could harm it significantly. Not one of them could land a blow that made any difference. And all the while the Hokage simply stood there, staring at the demon, blue eyes blazing with ice. His breathing steadily became harsh and ragged, though he seemed to be doing nothing. The fox suddenly raged, the anger in his roar vibrating through every man and woman's chest down to their core. Then for no apparent reason it vanished, disappeared in a red blaze of heatless flame before its form could hit the ground. Everyone stared in shock at the place where the demon had been, but Kakashi had the presence of mind to look towards their leader, knowing instinctively that it was not that easy and that someone would pay. Sure enough, as he locked eyes with the Hokage, the blond man smiled. It was a smile full of hope and joy, of happiness and accomplishment, of unadulterated relief on the surface. But Kakashi had spent too much time around him to miss the underlying look of bitter defeat, of utter despair, of things left undone, unsaid and unseen. The copy ninja would have swallowed his own kunai to miss that look. Late again, a voice mocked. Can you ever be on time? Less than scum. He still didn't know what had happened. Only that Rin had pronounced Sensei Doa and Sandaime-sama, who had now taken up his old position on the council's insistence, had pronounced the village safe. However, safe in no way meant intact. The Kyuubi hadn't actually made it all the way inside the village fortunately, but it had still dealt a lot of damage. The south portion of the wall was completely destroyed where the Kyuubi had charged it, and the homes and buildings on that edge were demolished from its 9 tails and paws. Even the buildings in the center of the village, where Kakashi lived, had started to come down from the shockwaves created by the demon fox's rampaging. The north end of the village, being farthest away from the battle scene, was the least damaged, so those who had lost their homes were invited to stay until they could build something that they could live in. The biggest problem lay in the fact that homes were not the only buildings affected. The orphanage and its adjoining dorms resided in the south part of the village and would take quite a while to rebuild. The older kids, about 10 to 15 years old, would be okay. Most had followed in their parents' footsteps and become ninja, and their subsequent training had instilled a modicum of maturity in them that would make it no problem for them to board in the North District. The 5 to 9-year-olds were a little tougher to accommodate, but the North District was the richer part of the village, and those who were parents of kids around the same age agreed to take them in exchange for some compensation. It was the infant to 4-year-olds that were more difficult. There weren't many of them. A lot of ninja women who had recently given birth simply held off their careers for a few years, and a few retired from the shinobi way for good. Every so often, however, a kunoichi was summoned to duty and never returned alive. The people of Konoha weren't heartless citizens, but the fact was that it took far too much energy to raise even a toddler, while the village needed rebuilding. An infant was even more work, as they needed constant attention in the form of playtime, regular diaper changes and formula feedings, and frequently woke up in the middle of the night. Kakashi, of course, wasn't even vaguely aware of most of this. He had deduced so far that this thing in his arms needed to eat at some point, that it probably wasn't potty trained, and that it felt as if it would break if he didn't support its entire body. Beyond that, he was clueless. Shit, he said to the still sleeping bundle, you realize I don't even know how to hold you properly? So really, if this doesn't go the way you thought it would, don't blame me. You have Sandaime-sama to thank for that. The copy ninja suddenly scowled. Better yet, blame your father. I don't suppose you have any idea what was going through his head? The only reply he got was a scrunched face and a heel that had worked its way out of the blankets jammed into the top of his thigh. It kind of hurt, but his numerous injuries from mission work had been far more painful, and it couldn't really compare to the broken ribs he was sporting right now. Even so, the strength of its kick surprised him. It had nothing to do with its size. Kakashi had met several ninja who had drawn the genetic short straw, no pun intended, and also had considerable strength, but he had always held by the standard that the less you trained your body, the weaker you were. This was true of every person he knew, and so it followed that an infant, especially a newborn one, would be well. A limp rag doll came to mind, especially since he had realized that moving his arm from under its head deprived it of all support. So how could something that couldn't keep its head up for even 1 second deliver a kick that would register as painful? The silver-haired ninja decided to try something. If its legs were that strong already, what about its arms or hands? Gently. Everything about this new being seemed to require a gentleness Kakashi didn't know he had. Gently he pushed aside some of the blankets to gain access to its arm. He obviously couldn't ask it to aim a punch at him. Even if it wasn't asleep, the copy ninja wasn't stupid enough to think it would understand him. Instead, he slipped one finger, and it barely fit, into its slightly fisted hand. The reaction was immediate. Actually, it was more than immediate. Kakashi barely had time to slide his finger in before its fist closed tightly around the finger, and refused to let go. Whoa, he whispered. It was a strong grip, too. Not strong enough that he couldn't easily pry his finger out if he wanted to, but the fact that he had to make an effort at all was incredible to Kakashi. The sight of that tiny, innocent fist gripping so trustingly to one of the deadliest, bloodiest fingers Kakashi knew made him a little breathless, too. It was one of the most amazing things he had ever seen. There was a knock on the door, or what was left of it, and the Jounin's breathlessness left him in the form of a frustrated growl. He hadn't been lying when he said that he didn't know how to hold it properly. How on earth was he supposed to get up? He settled for just yelling at the person to come in, but as soon as he realized who his visitor was, he wished he had gotten up so that he could have slammed the door back in the old geezer's face. It would have been disrespectful, sure, but it would have felt damn good. He compromised by letting the disrespect ooze into his voice. Hello, Hokage-sama. I'd stand, but I seem to have my hands full. Please sit. Anywhere. I'm not entirely sure where all my chairs are right now. The Sandaime sighed. It was a better response than he had been expecting, frankly, and he was reasonably sure that he had the child in his soldier's arms to thank for that. Sandaime had been very close to all his students, and, while he wasn't expected to share everything with them, the formerly retired Hokage had known that Rin and Kakashi would not be happy with being kept out of the loop when he had insisted upon it. They would be even more furious when they learned of what had actually occurred. The old man motioned for those who had followed him to bring in what they carried while he spoke to the young Jounin. Kakashi. I'm sorry we are meeting again under these unfortunate circumstances. I'm afraid I haven't much time to spare, but I have some information that must be discussed with you, and it cannot wait. Kakashi was only paying the Sandaime half his attention as the other half watched the men entering his house with boxes of stuff. That one box looked like it might contain diapers in it, but some of the other things he had never seen in his life. Wait, those might be clothes, but they looked awfully small. He knew that it was tiny, but could it really fit into those? They looked like they might fit on a doll, but not the bundle currently in his arms. You're really serious about this, aren't you? The copy ninja asked. You really want me to take care of this? You think I can actually handle it? 'Cause I'm telling you right now, I have no idea what I'm doing. It will be difficult, Hiruzen conceded, aware that he was probably understating the problem to the nth degree, but I do think you will be capable. In actuality, it had very little to do with how capable Kakashi was. If Sarutobi had been able to choose from anyone he wanted to take care of the child, Kakashi would have been his absolute last choice. As it was, his choices were severely limited, and the silver-haired ninja had suddenly jumped to the head of his list. I'm not kidding, Hokage-sama. I literally have no idea what I'm doing. I'm a ninja, Sandaime-sama. One of your shinobi, and all I know is how to kill. How am I supposed to do this? What am I supposed to do with that? Kakashi attempted to point at the boxes that were still being brought in, but his left arm was currently occupied supporting the infant's head, and his right hand was caught in the young boy's fist. The Jounin ended up pointing more with his elbow than anything else. Sarutobi prayed to any god listening that it meant Kakashi was already interacting with the child. It would make it that much easier to convince him to take this assignment. These are supplies you will need to take care of the boy. Every family that has agreed to take an orphan in is receiving some form of compensation, and those with infants are being given supplies for the first few weeks. The young jounin gave a bitter laugh. Family? So I'm a family now, am I? Years spent living on my own and suddenly I qualify as a fucking family. You are the closest thing this boy has. Hiruzen hissed, mindful of the fact that the infant was still sleeping. Believe me, I wish I could hand him over to Rin. She's a much better choice than you. But she's also a medic mean, and we need as many as possible to help with the injured in the hospital. She has no time to take care of an infant. What happened to Sensei's girlfriend then? The Anbu said she didn't die in childbirth, but he wouldn't tell me where she was. Isn't this her responsibility? The Hokage looked away from the copy ninja so as not to make it seem that the disappointment he was feeling was directed at him. The boy's mother has disappeared. She recovered very quickly after childbirth and ran away. I have had Anbu looking for her everywhere, but we haven't been successful so far. He shook his head. At this point, even if she does return to Konoha, she will not be allowed to take her child back. It is too dangerous for him. Kakashi looked up at the old man in surprise. As far as he knew, it wasn't like the Hokage to be so condemning. But then again, he had only met Sensei's girlfriend once, couldn't even recall her name, as the meeting had been brief and interruptive. Maybe she hadn't been as trustworthy as Yandame-sama had thought. Especially if she was willing to abandon her own newborn. Still, the jounin wasn't finished arguing his point yet. He was planning to pull out all the stops, or at least gain as much information as he could before the Hokage clammed up on him. How am I supposed to take on missions? And now the fight begins, thought Sarutobi. You won't be. What? How? Forget all this stuff I'm going to need. How am I supposed to pay for myself? The bundle was starting to stir again. Kakashi absently tried to pull the blanket back over it with his fingers still trapped in its fist, and his eyes focused on Sandame-sama. It hadn't occurred to him to remove his finger. It was the only thing reminding him that there was something fragile in his arms that he couldn't afford to break. Lucky Sandame-sama, you won't be, the Hokage reiterated, because you have already been given an assignment. Taking care of the boy is not simply a task that has been forced on you at an inopportune time. He has become your sole assignment for an indeterminate length of time. He took a deep breath and looked around the room. Those who had agreed to help bring supplies around had finished here and moved on to their next task. It left him free to discuss certain events. Kakashi. The death of the Yandame, the disappearance of the boy's mother, giving the child to you of all people. These are not coincidences. There is a reason behind it. Sandame almost continued, but for some reason the words "all I know is how to kill" echoed in his head, and for the first time he really began to worry about his choice. Yet there was no going back now. The council was giving him only this one chance. If Kakashi did not accept, the infant in his arms was going to die tonight. Please. If there is anyone listening to this prayer, please let this work. Out loud the Hokage asked, may I hold him? I haven't had the chance yet, and it would be a pleasure I haven't had in a while. Kakashi looked startled at the abrupt change in topic, but he also looked slightly relieved to be relieved of his charge. Sure, if you can manage it. I don't exactly know how to hand it over. The father and Sarutobi winced at having a child called it, and hoped it wasn't a sign of things to come. Picking up the boy was awkward. His old bones weren't as flexible as they had always been, even considering that he was a shinobi. They creaked and protested as he bent over, and gathering the infant in his arms wasn't made any easier by the fact that he hung on to Kakashi's finger like it was his last link to life. The Hokage shuddered at the image, praying that the jounin's prying to free himself wasn't as symbolic as it seemed. At least Kakashi had managed to work out that the head needed support, as he kept his left hand underneath until Sarutobi could do it himself. So there was hope after all. Hiruzen cradled the infant, rocking him gently back and forth as he walked to the other side of the room, basking in the feeling of life in his arms. As a ninja he had dealt far too much death and seen too much of it as well. It no longer bothered him as it once had, but as he had grown closer to it himself he often wondered if that was not a tragedy, too. He sometimes envied the midwives who had the chance to bring a child into the world, something not so easily done as a kunai across the neck or a well-performed jutsu. I'd do anything to save this village. Protecting the people here is the most important thing I'll ever do. Especially now. But you know what I will regret? That I'll never know. Is it a boy or a girl? A heartbreaking laugh. Kind of makes me wish we had decided to find out, now. A pause. We didn't even pick a name, you know? Wanted to wait until it was born. She hated the idea of a gender-neutral name. Now she won't even have to fight me about it. The memory brought tears to the old man's eyes. Neither of them would name the boy now. As clueless as he was, even Kakashi couldn't call the infant it forever. And since he was to become the primary caregiver, Sarutobi had decided it would be his right. If he chose to take the boy. Hokage-sama? What's going on? What did you mean not a coincidence? Sandame blinked the tears away and began. Yandame had discovered another forbidden jutsu several months ago. It is called Shiki Fujin and allows the user to seal his opponent's soul away. Unfortunately, the user's soul is also destroyed. That wasn't entirely true, but for the purpose of quick explanation, it would have the same effect. When the demon fox appeared, it quickly became apparent to Yondaime that there would be no stopping it. The Kyuubi was simply too powerful. So he devised a plan. Sealing the Kyuubi inside a dead body would not work, an unfortunate side effect of its power. Sealing it inside another adult would not work either. Its chakra would overpower the adult, and burn him, or her from the inside out. A child might live longer, but that would not last. The only viable solution was a newborn, someone whose chakra paths were completely new and open to anything, someone who could adapt to the power of the Kyuubi, and keep the body from overloading if the seal was ever cracked later on in life. Kakashi wasn't stupid. Sandaime-sama knew he had figured out where this was going, and the widening of his one visible eye only confirmed it. He sealed the Kyuubi-sensei sealed the Kyuubi in his own son. The Jounin hadn't attempted to kill the child yet. Perhaps things would be okay. We think the boy's mother, who knew about what was to happen, Yondaime told her, ran because she wanted no part in taking care of a child that had her lover's killer inside. She is most likely not coming back, and if she does she will probably try to kill the boy. We need someone who can be spared to raise him, and will protect him from that. Not just from his mother, but from others in the village. Yondaime's hope was that his son become a hero, as he did, but there will undoubtedly be those who will not see the boy as anything but the monster inside. Kakashi did not say anything. He looked far away and Sandaime wondered if the last part of his speech had even been heard. The infant, who was surprisingly still sleeping, began to shift again, although he seemed to be closer to waking than before. Stay asleep, little one. Now is not the time to draw attention to yourself. Kakashi, Sarutobi said sternly, you are the only one who can take care of this child. NBU forces cannot be spared. Chunin and Genin do not have the ability to protect him from more powerful enemies. Very few of the Jounin can be trusted, fewer still are available, and only one of those available was even remotely close to the Yondaime. There is no doubt he would have had you treat the boy as a nephew anyway. Of all the choices, he would want you to be the one. The copy ninja seemed to shake out of his stupor somewhat. He had focused on the Hokage by the end of the speech. The Sandaime figured that it was now or never. He would lay the cards on the table. If Kakashi refused, he would try to persuade reasonably, but if it did not work, the council is only giving me one chance. Either you take the boy in right here, right now, or they have ordered his execution for tonight. That got the Jounin's attention. At first the Sandaime thought he would agree. The infant would live. Then Kakashi's one eye blazed with fury as he jumped up. Then kill it. Kill the fucking demon. That bastard killed our men. Killed my comrades. That thing killed him, and you want to let it live? What the hell kind of Hokage are you? Sarutobi's calm demeanor rapidly deteriorated into cold fury as he listened to Kakashi speak. I am the only kind of Hokage there is, boy. I am a leader who cares for his people. All of his people. This child, this human being is one of the people I was charged with taking care of, and I will do my damnedest to make sure that happens. It's a monster. Do you really believe that? If Yondaime were here right now, if your sensei were here this very minute, could you really tell him, straight to his face, that his son, the child he wanted to raise with his whole heart, is nothing more than the vicious monster that he put there himself? Do you really believe that it didn't break his heart that he had to put his own son's very existence in danger in order to save his village? The silver-haired ninja visibly started at that. It was a bittersweet triumph for the Hokage, as it meant there was a chance the infant could be saved. Yet if one of those closest to the Yondaime had not stopped to think how the man himself had felt about his son, how could the rest of the village be expected to do any better? Kakashi, my boy, Sarutobi said, gently now as if coaxing a mouse out of its hole. He took a few steps towards the Jounin, praying it was the right move, and slipped his own finger into the fist of the child. The infant reacted right away and then pulled the finger close to his chest, as if he were cuddling it. Kakashi, is this the action of a vicious monster? Or can you see the helpless infant boy who needs your care? The copy ninja merely stared for several minutes. The child squirmed in the Hokage's arms, and the Sandaime knew he would not stay asleep much longer. That he had not awakened at all yet was a small miracle in and of itself. Finally, the young Jounin took a shuddering breath and held out his arms. Fine. If I'm the only one who can handle this, I suppose it's the least I can do for sensei. But I'm warning you. I really wasn't kidding when I said I had no clue what I'm supposed to do. The Hokage didn't even bother hiding the sigh of relief that left his mouth. When he got home tonight he was getting so drunk he'd have a hangover till the end of next week. I'll have one of the mothers from the North District come over to help teach you what you'll need to know. The Sandaime passed the bundle back to Kakashi. It was awkward this time around too, as the copy ninja still didn't know how to hold it correctly, and it had started squirming around a lot more. The Hokage didn't say a word, instead shifting Kakashi's arms around until he finally was holding it securely. It still felt a little weird, but he figured he'd better get used to it pretty quickly. Then suddenly, as if it knew everything was now all right, that it would be okay to greet the world for the first time, it opened its eyes. The bundle stared up at him and Kakashi had to sit back down in a kind of shocked amazement. It gazed at him with bright, gorgeous blue eyes that blazed with a sort of fiery ice. Gods above, Kakashi thought, he really is your son, sensei. And for a moment the world had been perfect. Then it started crying bloody murder. The hour and a half involved in waiting for help to arrive was probably the longest hour and a half Kakashi had ever suffered through, and that was including the mission to the Earth country where he had been forced to remain completely motionless for nearly 8 hours in order to escape detection. The baby, Kakashi figured he couldn't really call it a bundle anymore, gave off a piercing screech while it was crying that made the copy nin want to do nothing more than put his hands over his ears and walk away. He had floundered a bit before the Hokage had rattled off a few suggestions to try and calm it down, at which point he floundered a lot more than before. He refused to call it panicking. He had faced down crowds of enemies with nothing more than a few kunai and his father's blade. He had infiltrated the strongholds of several lords across the continent. He had even been captured at one point as a chunin and freed 5 days later, and not once had he panicked. A one-day-old newborn could not possibly force him to start. Sandaime realized that the best thing to do for the poor jounin would be to contact one of the women of the North District as soon as possible. Unfortunately, as he had been doing his best to keep the revelation about the Kyuubi's whereabouts a secret, there was no one around to take up the task while he helped the silver-haired ninja himself. In any case, the village was still in shambles and there were other things to attend to besides a wailing infant that were slightly more important. He informed the teen of all this, feeling a wave of pity as Kakashi's face silently begged him for help. It really would be best if the boy started to try figuring things out on his own. He wouldn't always have someone to help him out, and every child had a different kind of discipline. This wasn't a training session. The silver-haired ninja's Sharingan couldn't be used to copy a few moves that someone else had demonstrated to calm down their own baby. One last thing, the Sandaime called back as he was walking out the door. No one else besides a select few Anbu and some others know about the boy, outside of the council. I would prefer to keep it this way. I think Rin deserves to know, but other than her please refrain from speaking of this with anyone. Kakashi understood that this was an order more than a polite request. Yes, sir, he practically shouted over the increasingly loud cries of the baby, and then the Hokage had stepped out of the house, slid the door behind him, and streaked off toward help. The copy ninja decided he was lucky the old man hadn't walked all the way there. Even so, Konoha was a large place, and it would take a good 10 minutes to get to the richer side of town. After that, who knew how long it would take to find someone who could help them? If they weren't busy trying to fit 3 families in a house built for one, they would have to have experience with taking care of kids. Chances were anybody with that criteria would have a kid of their own they would be taking care of and probably wouldn't want the burden of teaching a useless jounin adoptive guardian. Although, come to think of it, Kakashi was pretty sure that a 14-year-old with the cumulative babysitting experience of 2 hours knew more than he did right now. Maybe the Hokage would just send her over. Speaking of which, once they found someone to come over, that person would have to walk back to his house. All of this meant that it wasn't inconceivable that he would be left to his own devices for the better part of the day. Letting the baby continue its mission to deafen the entire village was obviously not an option, so the jounin started attempting to calm it on his own. As a ninja, Kakashi had to be innovative when he was surprised by an enemy, creating an attack plan as soon as possible and needing it 4 minutes ago. His intelligence, tracking skills and sharp senses made this an easier task, and he was a better ninja for it. However, despite the fact that the Uchiha clan was rather large, he was one of very few, little-known copy ninja, which gave him an advantage that he frequently exploited and relied upon. Innovation was all well and fine, but he often still clung to the rules and regulations of the shinobi way. Sometimes doing so kept him up at night, with one-eyed ghosts that haunted his dreams, but not following them was often worse. So, copying that he was, his first attempt at quieting the baby involved imitation. He had noticed the Hokage gently rocking it after he had initially picked it up and thought it was as good a place as any to start. He was still unsure and uncomfortable with holding the newborn. That word was coming up a lot lately, and his first attempts at moving it back and forth were too something. Too hard? Too soft? No, probably not too soft, as it began to cry louder than before. Was that even possible? And Kakashi didn't think that being too gentle would ever be an issue with something as fragile as this baby. Too hard then. Cursing himself for not having his Sharingan activated in the presence of the Sandaime, he tried to slow down the back and forth motion of his arms. For a brief, shining moment it seemed as if he was succeeding and that maybe he wouldn't need as much help as he thought. The infant's cries slowed down and lowered in volume, and Kakashi found himself fighting down a smile of triumph. Seriously, it was not that big of a deal, especially when the volume picked back up again. The jounin let out a growl of frustration and stopped his movement, ready to bang his head against the wall. It might have been less painful, and definitely less awkward, but after taking a breath and counting to 10, which didn't calm him down any but gave him time to think, he decided he must be doing something right if he had managed a lull in the wailing, and kept trying. Several times the teen thought he had accomplished it. There was even a point at which the infant did nothing more than take quick, hitched breaths for a full 30 seconds before it started up again. Whatever he had been doing failed to work a second time, but it gave him minute hope and he kept at it. Even so, half an hour later he had run out of ideas and decided that a change in tactics was in order. Seeing as how copying had failed, not to mention the rather unavoidable fact that there was no one else around to copy, Kakashi headed over to the boxes. A ninja was always careful to retrieve as many kunai and shuriken from the battlefield as he could so as not to waste supplies, or need to buy more, but it wasn't practical if you were making a hasty retreat, and there was always that wayward weapon that you were sure you had thrown in this direction during training, but for all your shinobi skills, you just couldn't seem to find it. Taking stock of your supplies, weapons and medkit alike, was a necessary task so that you were never caught unawares. It also let you keep a list fresh in your mind so that those few weapons that you rarely used were not forgotten in a situation where they became helpful. Hopefully the same theory could be applied to whatever had been dumped on his living room floor. He gripped the baby a little tighter in his left arm as he rummaged around with his right. The Jounin found he had been correct in his original observation that one of the boxes held clothes. Mostly they were one-piece outfits. Light blue ones, dark blue, red, a few green. He made a mental note to throw those out as soon as possible, and one yellow one with each having its own pattern of cats, dogs, ducks, shapes and various other seemingly random objects. There was one heavier jacket for the colder months. It didn't often snow in Konoha, but it did get chilly and people tended to wrap up. The copying even pulled out a pair of the smallest sandals he had ever seen, although they looked as if they were still a little too big for the infant yet, before throwing them back in the box and closing it up. There was obviously nothing in here that was going to be useful. The second box was also unhelpful as it contained towels, soap, shampoo and something that looked like a small bucket or tub. Obviously they were supplies to give the baby a bath, but that was probably not the reason it was wailing away. The next 3 boxes he opened also had nothing in them he thought would help. Did he really need all of this? But the last one contained several cans of powdered baby formula. He pulled one out with a hand and brought it over to his small kitchen, reading the directions as he walked, only to realize that he would need something to put the formula in. The silver-haired teen spent some time rummaging through one of the boxes that he had seen bottles in with one hand, which quickly became frustrating as everything fell back into place after he had pushed it out of the way. He wondered if it was safe to put the infant down. Just laying it on the floor seemed wrong, but with the way it would squirm around every once in a while, he wasn't sure it wouldn't fall off the sofa. In the end Kakashi held onto it, but started taking everything out of the box until he reached what he wanted. The directions on the outside of the canister turned out to be one of the easiest things about this day. They were clear and generally concise. Boil water, measure powder, mix formula and let cool. The Jounin made a lot of banging and clattering noises trying to get his smallest pot from the clutter that was his kitchen cabinet one-handed, which added to his raging headache but thankfully did not incite the infant to raise his volume. Setting the water on the stove, he went back to the boxes to check on the rest of his options in case the formula didn't work. Kakashi had gone through most of the supplies so there wasn't much left to look through, mostly blankets and one random piece of cloth that didn't quite have the shape of a blanket but was otherwise unidentifiable. There was a horrifying moment when he realized that the last box contained diaper-changing supplies, and that a fresh diaper might be exactly what the infant needed. The teen was fairly sure he could figure out how to change a diaper, but the fact that he would have to, eventually, had him ready to drop the whole idea and hand the baby back to Sandame-sama. He immediately crushed that thought for a few reasons. One was the fact that there were no unpleasant smells emanating from it, so he could put that inevitable obstacle off for now. The second was that the water had finished boiling, and the third was that he didn't like the idea of letting down yet another person from his team, especially his sensei, dead or not. By this point the infant was actually starting to sound hoarse from all its crying, so the copying began rushing to get the formula together. The gods must have been laughing at him, he thought, as he fumbled around with one hand to open the seal on the canister. Then he wasn't thinking much of anything as the baby slipped from his grasp. It wasn't much of a fall. He had just been so frustrated that he hadn't been paying much attention to his grip on the infant loosening ever so slightly over time. His ninja reflexes had him reacting right away, pulling the infant to his chest with both hands before he lost his hold on it completely. Yet as the canister crashed to the ground, all Kakashi could hear was the pounding of his heart in his ears, in his throat and his instincts screaming, "Protect! Protect!" The problem was he was the person the baby needed protecting from and it left him frozen in the middle of his kitchen, conflicting emotions causing him a lot of confusion along with the pain from pressuring his fractured ribs. Eventually he calmed down, although his legs were oddly shaky and he still gripped the infant tightly. He righted a kitchen chair that he hadn't had a chance to get to since the attack and sat down in it, trying to slow his breathing and rocking the baby again. It had about as much of an effect on the crying as it had before, but it made him feel better, so he kept at it and muttered, "It's okay, it's okay. I've got you, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I've got you now, it's okay." The Jounin wasn't sure how long he sat there like that, mumbling reassurances and apologies to someone, but he was sure that until he had some help he wasn't going to let go of the infant at all. The idea that he could have dropped the baby, Sensei's son, was making him a little sick. The silver-haired teen may have been mostly clueless about kids, but even he knew that letting one fall from your arms could do serious damage. Images started flying through his brain. He could have given it brain damage, he could have killed it. With the kind of support its head needed, the ninja in him could easily see the next snap. A polite knock sounded on his front door, cutting of the destructive line of thought. Kakashi stood up very carefully and instead of sliding the entrance open with his hands he used his foot to nudge it until he could move it the rest of the way with his elbow. "Hello," said the woman standing in front of him. She had an eyebrow raised at the odd way of opening the front entrance but didn't comment, instead opting to focus on the screaming baby in Kakashi's arms. "I'm Nara Yoshino. Hokage-sama sent me over to help you out." The child resting on her hip had slid down, and she lifted him up slightly to readjust his weight. The boy just lay his head back down on his mother's shoulder and yawned. This is Shikamaru. He'll probably just sleep the whole time I'm here, so I'll lay him down, and we can get right to work. Kakashi nodded in a slight daze before realizing he was being rude. Sorry. I'm, Kakashi. I mean Hatake Kakashi. Go ahead and come in. I guess you can put him on my futon, but it's down the hallway. Is that okay? I mean, is it safe to just put them down and walk away? Yoshino entered and began to walk towards where Hatake-san had pointed, at first only giving half her attention to the ninja's questions until she realized he was serious. She didn't stop moving, but she started to wonder what she had gotten herself into when she agreed to the Hokage's request. The young mother thought about her answer carefully, easily falling into a teaching mode. The way he had worded his question, Hatake-san seemed to have associated Shika-chan with his boy, but that was a bad habit to get into. Her son was already 7 months old, and that made him light years ahead, relatively, of the newborn orphan. Shika-chan will be fine, she replied as she entered Hatake-san's bedroom, speaking loudly to be heard. But you can't compare what is okay for my son to what you should do for your infant. Babies do a lot of developing when they're this young, so you have to pay attention to what he needs and not what Shika-chan needs. Right now you should be close enough to get to the boy right away, even if he's sleeping. Shika-chan had done exactly as she had thought he would when the woman laid him down, and his breathing evened out as soon as hit the futon, despite the racket coming from his future playmate. She stepped back into the hallway, coming face to face with the jounin. So as long as I'm nearby I can put it on a blanket or something? He asked. The black-haired woman stared at her new student, unsure if he had misspoken or not. Hatake-san looked back at her with slightly apprehensive eyes, but no indication that he had realized what he said was wrong in any way. She took 2 steps toward the teen, invading his personal space enough that he almost stepped back in reflex, and slapped him upside the head. Ow! What the? Kakashi made sure his grip on the infant was still tight before going on. What the hell was that for? I just asked a question. You called the baby in it. What kind of guardian calls a child in it? Yoshino berated him. He's not an object. You wouldn't call a brother, or another family member in it, would you? There are pronouns for this kind of thing. He. Consider it my first bit of instruction. He. Okay. Sorry. As long as I'm nearby I can put him on a blanket. The woman frowned. Better. But if you call the boy in it after this I won't hesitate to correct you again. And yes, to answer your question. Although, if you put him down now he might get more upset. Babies like the security of someone holding them close, so letting him go will just increase his anxiety. For now I'll do as much as I need to so that we can get him to stop crying. What have you tried already? Kakashi recounted the little that he had managed to get through so far, although he skipped the part where he almost dropped the boy. Even without punishment, the jounin wasn't going to forget what he had done soon. If the crazy woman was going to hit him for an incorrect pronoun, which he would admit had been pretty cold of him now that pointed it out, there was no telling what she would do if the copynin told her of his biggest mistake. Nara-san praised him for what he had done right and gave him a few other pointers. She made the formula as he watched, although she managed to hit him again, with a wooden spoon this time, when he was about to give the bottle to the baby without making sure it wouldn't burn his mouth. In the end that didn't help either. The kid wouldn't even drink half of the formula no matter what coaxing sounds the young mother made. They tried a few other things, none of which were of any help, and finally Kakashi relented to the dreaded diaper changing when Nara-san pointed out that he would have to learn at some point. Besides, the black-haired woman suggested to convince him, it might have nothing to do with whether he needs a new one or not. Maybe it's just an old one, and he feels uncomfortable. Kakashi gave her a disgruntled look that was clearly disbelieving. Does that kind of thing happen a lot? Well, no. They don't usually stay, clean that long, but if it gets you to agree, sure. It was while they were changing the baby that Kakashi ran into his first assignment-related problem. What is that? Nara-san questioned. Oh shit, Kakashi thought. They had pulled up the boy's outfit to reveal a design on the infant's stomach that no normal baby would have. It spiraled around his navel covering the lower half of his torso, and around the coil was writing that would offshoot in 8 different places. It looked like someone had used a magic marker to draw a stylized sun on the boy, or at least it would have if the damn thing hadn't been glowing a bright orange red. Sensei, the jounin prayed, I hope you knew what you were doing. Seals weren't entirely Kakashi's strong point, but he could tell right away that this one was incredibly powerful. The writing was intricate and almost entirely indiscernible, although part of that was from its shrunken size. What worried the copynin was that the Kyuubi was able to affect a seal this strong. He wasn't sure whether that was a testament to the yandame's skills or the power of the fox. Of course, the more immediate issue was how to explain everything to Nara-san without actually explaining it. Kakashi decided to mix some truth into his lie. Nara-san had said she was married to a shinobi, but that she herself was a civilian, so the woman probably wasn't able to distinguish between seal types. It looks like a protective seal. Some ninja must have needed to use one on him during the attack. They're not supposed to glow like that, are they? The silver-haired ninja studied it carefully, running his finger lightly over the spiral to gauge what was going on with the fox chakra. There was a chance he would be able to push it back without using any special techniques, which could interfere with the seal. But if he wasn't careful he would ruin it entirely, and Yandame-sama's sacrifice would be for nothing. It was times like these that he almost wished he had a Byakugan to clearly distinguish chakra patterns in the body. But his Sharingan wasn't without its uses. It would give him a general idea of what was happening. As soon as Kakashi activated his eye, he knew what the problem was. There was a mass of energy that was dense, but somehow very weak at the same time, trying to smother a lighter chakra mass. The Kyuubi was trying to take over the host's body even in its current condition, and the young infant didn't like the feeling apparently. It was an easily solved problem, especially with the fox's chakra caged up as it was. It wouldn't take more than a metaphorical slap on the wrist to the invading energy to get it to back off. If he could just control his chakra enough, he quickly pulled his hand back, but he still overdid it slightly. The glowing faded, as did the mark after it, but a faint red handprint was left behind. He had needed to give a fairly intense burst, small, but intense, and had apparently given the newborn a slight chakra burn. The Jounin frowned, annoyed that his chakra control had weakened. He would have to work on that at some point so that he didn't keep hurting his charge if the fox demon tried a similar stunt. But just as this thought occurred to him, the handprint disappeared. Weird, he thought to himself. Maybe I just pressed too hard. But no, he had barely been touching the infant's stomach. Is it gone? Nara-san startled him. What? He replied incredulously. Why would she want the Kyuubi seal gone? The protective seal. Did you get rid of it? I think that was what made him upset. Oh, was the Copynin's intelligent reply, mentally berating himself for forgetting his lie so quickly. What was his problem today? Yeah, I dealt with it. And sure enough, as they finished up the diaper-changing lesson, the boy's wailing became soft crying, then choked sobs, and finally he fell back to sleep. Poor guy, Yoshino-kun, all those tears must have worn you out. She gently stroked the baby's hair, glad to have a respite for both herself and Hataki-san. Crying infants gave anyone a headache after a while, and the poor ninja had been subjected to it for much longer than her. Suddenly, a figure lazily crawled into her field of vision, flopped down near the infant, and yawned. Shika-chan. I didn't think you'd be crawling around so soon. Sorry, baby, I would have brought you out otherwise. Did we wake you up? Her son looked up at her with one half-lidded eye, and then glanced over at the newborn before slowly pushing himself back up and crawling towards her lap. She picked him up and cuddled him, glad that her 7-month-old had never done much crying himself. Yoshino smiled at the Copynin. I still don't know if that means yes or no. Her smile faded a little. The 17-year-old was lying on his back with his arms crossed over his face, clearly worn out himself. How are you holding up, Hataki-san? She asked, trying to see how well he was dealing with the stress. Badly, he replied. At least he was being honest. These things have been happening too fast, too intense. I can't even go do something to take my mind off it now either. I'm frustrated and angry and scared? She offered when he didn't finish his sentence. I don't know a damn thing about raising a kid, Nara-san. The silver-haired teen burst out, sitting up suddenly. Those boxes over there don't mean shit to me. I don't have the instinct a mother would have. I don't even have the instinct a civilian would have. Even normal protection detail doesn't use this much concentration or stamina, because you don't usually have to take care of the client yourself. I almost The Jounin cut himself off, eyes widening, then looked away. He breathed deeply before continuing a little more calmly. And on top of all that I have to deal with this. He waved his arm encompassing the area around himself. I've got all this damn anger that I can't always get a grip on. A shinobi shows no emotion. But lately it's been hard to do. I'm not even sure I should, because a friend once said something But if I ruin another mission because I can't hold back. Okay, first things first, the woman replied firmly when it seemed like the outburst was over. Mother's intuition has very little to do with anything. You think I raised Shika-chan on my own? My mother helped me, my husband helps me, and I did a lot of reading up on babies. They don't just come out of the womb with instructions. And you're not the only ninja to wonder about his ability to raise a child. Shikaku would kill me if he ever found out I told you, but he had a lot of insecurities too. But that's why I'm here, Hataki-san. I'll get you sorted out, and if you ever need more advice just ask. I'll even lend you my books. As for the emotion thing, not showing emotion is not the same as not having emotion. And seriously, I know you're a shinobi and all, but you're a teenage guy too. Hormones do weird things, so just be glad you're not a woman. You'll get through it. Besides, she said a little more gently, emotion will help you understand kids a little better. They tend to be prone to that kind of thing. Okay? When Hataki-san continued to stare at the ground near his feet, Yoshino leaned over to slap the back of his head. Oh. Geez, could you stop that? Were you listening to me at all? The young mother said exasperatedly. Yeah, I was. Okay. Thanks, I actually feel a little better. Or more controlled anyway. Good, Yoshino replied, then get some tea started, take some aspirin for your headache, and we'll start going through all your supplies while the boys are still quiet. The two adults placed the sleeping children on a blanket while they started opening the boxes so that Nara-san could properly explain what everything was for and how to use it. Most of it was actually pretty self-explanatory, the teen realized, now that there was no pressure to use it. Still, Nara-san was patient with him, answering any of his questions without any condescension, which he was glad for. They even got sidetracked occasionally and talked easily together, getting to know each other well enough that she began to insist he use her first name, and he offered up his own. It took them another hour before they finally reached the last few items. And that makes it easier to, huh? That's strange, Yoshino-san interrupted herself, giving the open package before her a confused look. What? The silver-haired ninja asked. They gave you a playpen. Kakashi had no idea what a playpen was and waited a moment for her to explain it to him, but when she continued to stare at it silently, he gave her a verbal nudge. Am I not supposed to have one? The young mother looked up startled. What? Oh. No, it's good. It gives you a safe place to put him when you need to go work on something for a little while. Don't wander out of the house or anything. But when you need to make meals, clean up the house, or even if you just need a break you can put him down in there. Get him some toys to play with as well and he can just amuse himself for a while. She stopped there, but then started to open her mouth to say something before closing it and opening it again. What? He invited her to speak her mind. Well, it could be nothing, but Tsukimi-chan also took in one of the infant orphans and was going through her supplies. It was pretty much the bare necessities. Clothes, food, diapers. I don't even think they gave her a bath set, although she does get an allowance to spend on the girl. But they've given you, I mean it's probably none of my business. Yoshino stumbled over her words, apparently not wanting to offend the ninja even though she had already smacked him with his own wooden spoon. They've given me a lot more than just the basics, the copy-nin interrupted to save her from embarrassment. I was starting to suspect something like that. A lot of this looks a little expensive. Deciding he must be okay with talking about it, Yoshino ventured a question. Do you have any idea why? I mean if it's because you're a ninja or something and they've been trying to force this on you by not bribery or anything. Oh great. That wouldn't offend Kakashi-san at all. Her mouth was going to get her into serious trouble, very soon. Why couldn't she just think first? Kakashi was a bit annoyed, partly because of what Yoshino-san was implying and partly because her statement may not have been true, but it certainly was going to look that way to the other villagers who had taken in their own kids. An orphan who was going to be around for a month at the most didn't really warrant giving a person every baby product under the sun, as the orphanage would have their own supplies to take care of that. However, he wasn't about to go around to all the villagers announcing the conditions of the infant's stay. The Jounin had a feeling that this was going to give him problems in the future, but seeing as there was nothing he could do about it right now, he settled for putting the woman at ease. This is kind of a special case. Nobody's bribing me or anything. I'm not going to get a bigger allowance either. But he paused. He needed to be careful about how he worded this or the young mother would start asking questions that he couldn't answer under the Hokage's orders. This isn't going to be an interim thing. I've been asked to, we're sort of a family now. In a very loose and general sense of the word, he muttered the last bit under his breath. The woman gave the copy-nin a surprised look. You mean you've adopted him? Kakashi-san, why? He's not a pet. You've said yourself you have absolutely no idea how to raise an infant. Why would you decide to adopt a random child? The shinobi gave an indignant look. I know, right? That's what I thought. Then he sighed, but it's not exactly random. He's Yandame Hokage-sama's kid. If Yoshino had thought she was surprised before, it was nothing compared to how she felt now. Hokage-sama? I didn't realize he was even seeing anybody. I mean, not that I would have any way of knowing, but you'd think it would have come through the grapevine, or something. She let it sink in. Incredible. I still don't get why they'd ask you to be the father of Hokage-sama's boy, but, Kakashi-san's, when I flashed in anger at her. Not the father, he snapped. Never the father. Only sensei holds that title. I don't care if they swear me to secrecy on that too. Nobody can replace a person's father. Not even sensei. There was a lot of baggage loaded into those statements, Yoshino knew. Growing up around ninja made her aware that shinobi often had issues. Even Shikaka had parts of his job that he just wouldn't discuss with her, not in 1,000 years. Some subjects you didn't touch, no matter how careful you thought you were at tiptoeing around them. Pushing just a fraction too hard at open wounds like that could get someone killed. Most times it was a flashback that had the ninja attacking anyone in their way, but sometimes the memories were just too much for the shinobi. She had learned early on to divert the conversation as quickly as possible, and latched onto the first topic that seemed remotely safe. Ah. That makes a little more sense then. Most ninja are very close to their sensei, so I guess it's not a big surprise that they might ask you to take in the Hokage's son. Still. I don't mean to offend you, but are you really the best person for the job? It was a very blunt statement, the kind that Kakashi was beginning to realize Yoshino-san was very prone to. Unfortunately, he didn't have quite that much leisure, and answering that question wasn't possible. How could he explain that he wasn't just raising a baby, but becoming the buffer between the boy, the Kyuubi and the entire village without giving everything away? In the end, his absence of an answer was just as blunt in a mind-your-own-business kind of way. Yoshino-san sighed. Alright. Anyway, that's the last of this stuff, so unless you have any more questions I guess we're done for the day. The kids will probably wake up soon, and I'm sure they'll be hungry. I've got housework left too. Supper for 3 families is going to be a bit of a pain. She smiled jokingly at her new friend and took his proffered hand to stand up. Are you sure? I didn't give you much of a chance to drink your tea. You're welcome to stay until you do, it'll give you a chance to relax. Ever since this whole mess started, people haven't had much time to pull themselves back together. It's the least I can do, Yoshino considered it. Truth be told, Kakashi-san was right. She and Shikaku had been lucky to be living away from most of the damage, so there wasn't much repair work that needed done. But Shikaku himself had been involved in the main battle and had gotten severely injured. She and Shika-chan had spent most of the night waiting with other family members at the hospital, and what little sleep she had gotten hadn't been restful. Even her son had seemed to be able to sense that something bad had happened and had slept less than usual. Then she had 2 other families from the South District show up at her doorstep, and getting them settled down had taken all morning and some of the afternoon. Just as she thought she could rest, the Sandaime had appeared before her with a request, directions to the center district, and very little explanation, and she would have refused him except she really wanted to get out of the house and away from Tamanari-san's 5 children. Thinking about the rambunctious family had her inwardly grimacing and shirking her duties. I guess I can stay a little longer, she answered. Picking up the tea she had left to cool, Yoshino moved to sit on the sofa. Kakashi-san, whose house was actually still a mess from the aftershocks of the fox demon, started picking up the larger pieces of his ceiling from the floor and piling them up at the entrance of his living room. There were a few holes in the roof, which he had managed to patch up earlier, but any type of downpour would become a problem soon. So now that you know the basics of child rearing, how do you think you'll do as a guardian? Kakashi-san shrugged. I'm not sure. I've kind of been viewing it as a training session of sorts. He picked up another piece of ceiling, placing it on the pile against the far wall. Try something, and if that doesn't work, try it a little differently, maybe get some advice from a sensei. He looked up at her and gave a kind smirk that was hidden behind his mask but visible in his eye. And if it still doesn't work, or starts to make things worse, you consider it an incomplete jutsu and try something new. Yoshino frowned at her tea, I guess. She was quiet for a moment. I can see where that might be easier for you. She took a sip from her cup. It just seems kind of harsh. No, not harsh, that's too much. It's that she struggled for the right words before changing tactics completely. You're raising a child, Kakashi-san. You're going to become family to the boy. Someone he's going to put all his trust in because he won't know what to do yet. Someone he'll look up to. If you want to do this right, you have to see him for what he is. He'll have joys that you can share in and fears that you can soothe. He's a human being, Kakashi-san, not an assignment. The teen stiffened at that and gave her a probing one-eyed stare that unnerved her for a moment. Then he turned away as if deciding that she really didn't mean anything by it. He had done it before and Yoshino was starting to suspect a pattern to the action, but she couldn't really grasp what it was yet. I didn't really think of it that way, the Jounin answered. Hokage-sama gave me the order himself, so I guess I just saw it as another mission assigned to me. It was a reasonable explanation. One that Yoshino should just be able to accept, but something was nagging at the back of her brain. It's just your imagination, she told herself. You're overanalyzing things because all the people you know expected to have children. Kakashi-san hasn't even had one full day to adjust. Give him time. She drank more of the tea and a silence fell over the room, broken only by the steady clunk, thunk of wood on wood as the copy-nin worked his way around the room. Yoshino simply stared at the 2 children. Shika-chan was beginning to stir again. For a 7-month-old, her son slept more than normal during the day, she had been told, but he woke up frequently, and seemed to have a knack for waking up at the most opportune time. The young woman swore that her son was smarter than most kids his age even though he barely acted interested in most of his toys. But her own mother had brushed it off, telling her that she had said the same thing about Yoshino when she was an infant. The youngest in the house hadn't stirred yet, still exhausted, but he hadn't really been fed when he was awake, so she estimated it wouldn't be more than an hour before he was up again. Suddenly a thought occurred to Yoshino. Kakashi-san, what did the Yondaime name his son? We've been using he all this time to stop you from using it, but I never thought to ask you his name. Kakashi paused in the middle of throwing an armful of wood that he had gathered from his kitchen towards the pile and, instead of landing neatly, it clattered more or less around the heap. Actually, he responded hesitantly, knowing he was about to receive another lecture. Please tell me you at least know his name. Well, I was a little distracted at the time, and the Sandaime ran off to get you without telling me. Kakashi-san, he winced. I know. I'll go ask as soon as I get a chance. Just, please, the copy-nin said with a mumble, don't hit me with that damn spoon. Things went smoothly for the most part after Yoshino-san left. The baby did wake up soon after, but this time there were very few tears, which were easily stopped with the leftover formula the Jounin heated up, and he fell asleep again soon after. Kakashi was able to finish cleaning up his house as much as possible, make his own supper, wipe his kunai and shuriken down, and put the playpen together with minimal frustration before heading off to sleep. On Yoshino-san's advice, the Jounin kept the infant in the same futon that he slept in. This turned out to be an excellent idea as he was woken up at least 3 times during the night to take care of various demands from the boy. When Kakashi awoke for the last time, it was on his own terms, but he found that the hour was about mid-morning, much later than he was used to getting up. Since the baby was still sleeping soundly, the copy-nin picked him up and placed him in the playpen in the living room so he could make breakfast and set about planning his day. His promise to find out the infant's name was foremost in his mind, and most likely Sandaime-sama wouldn't be too busy to refuse the jounin if he simply walked in. If worse came to worse, he could speak with the Hokage while the old man was in the genin assignment office. Afterwards he would have to pick up the monthly check he would be receiving for his own expenses, spend a few hours training, and then what? He wasn't taking on missions anytime soon, which meant he wouldn't be leaving the village. There was no traveling to do, no reporting into a client, which left him with a lot of free time in the afternoon. There would be some time where he would have to take care of the infant, obviously. But what other things could he do around here? There was the occasional get-together of chunin and jounin, he knew, but he had never been very sociable, spending most of his time involved in making himself a better ninja. Plus he had a feeling he would feel very weird carrying around a baby in front of all of his fellow shinobi. Said infant had woken up, if the fussing from the other room was any indication, so the Kakashi took a bottle of formula that had been prepared from his fridge, heated it, and brought it over. Yo, he greeted the baby as he carefully picked the boy up. I guess you're hungry, huh? Sure enough, as soon as the rubber hit the blue-eyed infant's lips he greedily sucked his meal down. You aren't going to give me any more trouble like yesterday, are you? Because I don't think I can stay completely sane if you do. Why don't we make a truce? You keep the crying to a minimum and I become your eternal slave. This way I get to keep my sanity and you get fed. Agreed? Blue eyes roamed around the room, never focusing on any one object for more than a few seconds, and a quiet slug sound as the boy drank was the only answer Kakashi received. Right, I'll hold you to that then. After they were finished with the feeding routine, which did not involve any surprise spit-ups this time, the jounin set about gathering extra diaper supplies. An extra outfit, he still had to get rid of those dark green ones, and a pacifier from the boxes, another bottle of formula from the fridge, and a light green blanket from the floor, placing them in his backpack. There was a sling for carrying the baby and that wrapped around his shoulders and back. It was the easiest way to carry the infant, but it put weight on the left side of his ribcage, and even switching to the other side didn't lessen the pain of his fractured ribs much. He made sure to take a couple of painkillers and added medicine on his to-do list. The whole thing took a good chunk of time, and Kakashi set out much later than he had planned. It was annoying, but he made up his mind to keep the backpack prepared ahead of time from now on, and start getting ready early when he had somewhere to be. Yash, he said, stepping out the door and locking it, let's go. The sights and sounds of Konoha, as the silver-haired ninja set off at a brisk pace, were paradoxically somber and uplifting at the same time. The banging of hammers on rooftops could be heard, and shouts from the foreman echoed around the town as the villagers all pitched in to help rebuild homes and apartments. It was one of the points about Konoha that secretly made Kakashi more proud of his home village than almost anything else. People were willing to give up their time and energy, gaining nothing in return, to help out their neighbor when things got really rough. Yet as he glanced around with his uncovered eye, there seemed to be a heavy cloud that had settled over everyone. The stores that usually bustled with shoppers were all closed, and any greetings that were thrown his way were half-hearted, an unusual sight for the normally friendly people of the Hidden Leaf village. Children ran back and forth across the jounin's path, but none of them were playing games or laughing. Instead, they all carried boxes of nails, tools, or small planks of wood from one district to another as needed. If anyone thought it was strange that a Hittite wearer carried an infant, they never mentioned it. The teen reasoned that they would have more important things on their mind, but it didn't make him feel any less irrationally self-conscious. He was halfway to his destination before he realized that his pace had quickened unintentionally, and forced himself to slow his steps. Getting himself worked up over little things like this was not going to be helpful to anyone. A small whimper had him looking down at the infant hanging around his chest. The boy had been about to fall asleep again, but Kakashi's jostling had woken him up slightly. Sorry, kiddo, he apologized while shifting the sling to make sure it was secure. You can close your eyes again. I'll be more careful, promise. The infant's soft breathing quickly evened out as the silver-haired teen went to continue on his way. As he looked up he noticed a man, wearing sawdusted clothes as well as carrying a toolbox and several 2x4s, giving him a strange glance. As soon as their eyes met, the carpenter looked away sheepishly, but Kakashi had already deciphered its meaning. He supposed it was a little weird that he would talk out loud to the infant in the streets, but it actually seemed natural to the copynin. Yoshino-san had made a lot of cooing sounds in attempts at coaxing the boy yesterday afternoon, and Kakashi had picked up on that habit during the night. The truth was the teen had spent so much time living on his own that it no longer bothered him to realize that he occasionally spoke out loud to no one. There wasn't much distance between that and speaking to a person who couldn't answer you. Finally, he reached the main office of the Hokage. An ANBU stood guard at the door, announcing the presence of the Sandaime better than any sign would. After an attack on the village, it was typical for the Hokage to have an entourage to ensure he would be safe from any enemies who thought they could finish off the weakened village. Some claimed that it was really unnecessary. A Hokage was the strongest shinobi in the village after all, but in reality the Sandaime couldn't be watching his back every minute of the day as he finished up paperwork, strengthened their defenses, and saw to it that the townspeople could rebuild their homes as soon as possible. Although the irony of the situation did not escape Kakashi, as he was about to walk into the room with the vessel of the very being who had taken the life of the last Hokage without any protest. The masked woman did not stop him, however, and after giving a polite knock and receiving an invitation to step in, he opened the door. Ah, Kakashi. What perfect timing. I've just finished explaining things to Rin. The brown-haired medic Nin turned towards the doorway and faced her comrade, giving him a weary smile. Hello, Kakashi. He gave you a nod by way of a greeting and turned back to the Hokage. If I'm interrupting anything, I can wait outside. No, Sandaime-sama waved it off. Rin has already finished giving me the reports from the hospital and I didn't really have any more to add. I'll let you two discuss things then. The girl said with a polite bow to both of the men. I won't be long. You might as well stay for this, Kakashi told his former team member. Hokage-sama, I promised Yoshino-san I would come in as soon as possible and ask, what's the boy's name? Rin perked up at this for the first time, really seeing what the silver-haired teen held in his arms. Is that him? Do you mind if I? He hesitated. If Sandaime-sama had told Rin everything, then she knew about the Kyuubi. She didn't seem angry, so it was probably safe to let her approach the infant. More importantly, he reminded himself, it was okay for her to approach him. They may have been distant to each other, but there was no bad blood between them over everything that had happened, and neither had ever said that avoiding each other was for the best. But a small part of the copy-nin still balked at being so close, unreasonably afraid for the med-nin's safety. Nothing will happen, he mentally scolded himself. We're in the Hokage's office. Tell her it's okay. He was a moment too late. I'm sorry, Rin stuttered. I shouldn't have asked. He's probably sleeping and, I'm sure, Sandaime-sama interrupted her, that Kakashi is simply wondering how you will react to him. Not everyone is willing to accept these things so easily, and it is his job to protect the boy. The pointed look the Jounin received was a bit annoying. Yes, thank you, I'm scum for hating a baby. I get it. However, it got him out of having to admit the real reason for not answering the medic nin, so he didn't push it. It's alright, Rin. I don't mind. He'll probably sleep right through it anyway. The girl approached eagerly and her face became much more animated at the sight of the small child. She stroked the boy's cheek gently with one finger and cooed over his tiny features. It must be a woman thing, Kakashi decided, as cooing was much different than simply conversing in his mind. Their brains must be wired to speak in high-pitched voices around children. Why? Please tell me it's not an important developmental stage. Sandaime smiled at the picture before him. Rin had reacted as he had expected her to when he relayed the story of the Yandaime's fate. Tears for her sensei, and anxiety for the life of his young descendant. The fact that the demon fox lived on inside of the child did little more than to surprise her, before she questioned the reaction of others. It had been a very medic-like response, concerned about the life rather than the revenge. It was unfortunate that her openness of emotions had never made the impression upon the copy ninja that he had hoped. To answer your question, Kakashi, the Hokage spoke up, receiving the attention from both Jounin. He hasn't been named yet. Kakashi waited for some elaboration and did not immediately ask the obvious follow-up question, simply because he thought he had misunderstood. Who hadn't been named yet, he wondered. Surely not Yandaime's son. He couldn't live his life with people simply referring to him as boy. Of course there was a name. But then who didn't have a name? Who gets to name him? Why didn't Sensei name him, or his mother? Rin was apparently in on the secret person's non-identity. Maybe they're talking about another orphan. Yandaime and his girlfriend did not wish to know the gender of the baby until he had been born, and it is my understanding that they had only managed to create a list of names before the attack. As both parents are unavailable, that list has essentially been lost, leaving someone else to decide it on an identity. The copy-nin was beginning to have a bad feeling about this. A very bad feeling. Sandaime-sama could not possibly be suggesting what he thought the old man was saying. Silently he begged to an unseen power that his suspicions not be confirmed. Unfortunately, the Jounin went unheard. I thought it best that Kakashi be the one to name him, as you will be taking care of him for quite a while. Really? Asked Rin, sounding surprised and turning to the silver-haired teen. That's great. You'll have to think of something really good, and you'll probably want to give him a name Sensei would approve of, so it will have to be somewhat original. This could take a while. My mother told me she and Dad argued forever before deciding on my name. I guess you won't have that problem though, will you? Yeah. Great. My choice. Sandaime raised an eyebrow at the shinobi. He had thought, from Kakashi's somewhat protective stance as Rin had come nearer to the infant, that there would be no more resistance from the ninja. His expectations were too high apparently, as the expression on the Jounin's face showed. You are not happy with my decision, he stated more than asked. I'm not thrilled anyway. We could always let Rin decide on a name, I suppose, the old man offered. It's up to you. The care of this child is completely in your hands, so you will have to choose one way or the other. Kakashi, however, had stopped listening at let Rin decide. It was out of the question. If Rin were allowed to choose the name, then he wouldn't be able to refuse her if she wanted to be more involved in the blue-eyed infant's life. She would use it as an excuse to try to get close to him again, and that couldn't happen. If he was going to keep his promise to Obito, if he was going to protect her, she had to keep her distance until things were under control. They had proven that 2 years ago. Even after all this time, on his best days, nothing had changed since then, and on others he was worse. No. I'll do it. I'll pick the name, he announced firmly, his voice more confident than he felt. Out of the corner of his eye he noticed Rin's face fall, and he was halfway to quashing the guilt it caused before stopping himself. Emotions are okay, don't let them control you, but don't push them away. It was still guilt though, something he had never been good with, and when he started to feel sick his mind reacted to protect him, erasing the feeling. Damn it, Obito. Well then, if that's settled and there's nothing else from either of you, you are free to go. A memory stirred and Kakashi realized he should probably report it. There is one thing, Hokage-sama. Yesterday, we came across he stopped, remembering the ANBU station outside. Is it safe to discuss that? Sandame nodded and the team continued. Yoshino-san and I came across the seal yesterday. I'm not entirely sure. My Sharingan can only see so much, but I think the Kyuubi was trying to break the seal and overtake the infant. Its chakra wasn't very strong. The seal is still completely sound. It hasn't cracked at all. I only needed to give it a push with my chakra and it backed off, but until then it causes the boy a lot of discomfort. That seems to be the only side effect. The news was troubling. If the Kyuubi could affect such a strong seal even at this early stage, then there was no telling how much damage it would be able to do later on, or how long the seal would last. Hopefully there was enough time for the demon and human chakra to adapt to each other. This being the case, then there was a chance they could save the boy's life if the seal ever did break. However, they would only be given the opportunity to do so if Kakashi could prove that the Kyuubi would not influence the boy. And if the seal did break before the two chakras assimilated, the infant's body would be destroyed from the inside out. But the Sandame was getting ahead of himself. There was the possibility that this was just the last vestiges of the fight, a final resistance from a demon not used to being tamed. Too many what-ifs and not enough answers. They would have to wait and see. Watch for this kind of thing again, he ordered after some thought. If it gets worse, or better, report back to me immediately. If we want to make sure the problem is contained, we must be prepared. We will respond as much as possible. Nothing further. Dismissed. Yes, sir, came the reply, and both Jounin bowed politely and exited. Rin, being the last one out, closed the door and Kapi and Medicnine stood there facing each other. Kakashi knew he should just walk away, that talking to Rin would only lead to trouble, but she was still someone important to him, and ignoring her seemed like the wrong thing to do. So I guess you'll be heading back to the hospital then. Rin shook her head. Not quite yet. I'm actually on a 4-hour break right now. We've been healing people non-stop since the attack and there are still plenty more patients. But I need some sleep or I'll be useless. I'm on a 24-hour chakra ban as it is. The teen looked at his friend more carefully and noticed that the weariness from before had returned to her face. She was exhausted, probably from an adrenaline rush that had died down once she left the med center and a full day of healing. 4 hours wasn't going to be enough to completely revitalize her, especially since the meeting with the Hokage had probably cut it down to 3, but she would be able to keep going for a day or 2 more before she really had to quit. Go home and sleep, he ordered before turning around and walking away, past the ANBU still standing guard. If they kept up a conversation, the brown-haired girl would be wasting time that could be used to take care of her body's needs. Unfortunately, this didn't stop her. Kakashi, wait. Kakashi! Can't we just walk together? It won't hurt to talk. The Jounin sighed as he came to a stop. If he kept on going she would only follow him until he answered her. She was willing to keep her distance only until he breached the gap, and then she couldn't be shaken off no matter what he tried to do. Rin, you can't do this. You'll be needed to help with patients later. I have other things I need to take care of. Get some how about getting some ramen? The silver-haired Jounin whirled around to face his companion. Rin's face was very open, pleading, desperate for him to agree, yet he couldn't help but look at her with a small amount of incredulity. Rin, you hate ramen. There aren't any ramen stands nearby and most places are closed right now anyway. Give it up and go home. Why? She yelled at him. Why are you still avoiding me? I get that you won't acknowledge my feelings because of Obito. I get that. I promised I wouldn't act on them, but why won't you let me be your friend? Why won't you let anyone close? Weren't you going to protect me? How can you do that if I never see you? She had started to cry during her outburst, and even the ANBU was looking a little uncomfortable at being, literally, in the middle of the argument. It has nothing to do with your feelings, Kakashi tried to explain. You know I can't the mission. I still haven't. That was 2 years ago. It was an accident. We were both to blame. The only reason I joined another team was because you were still in the hospital. You can't argue your way out of this one, Hataki. We just need to get back together, work on a few low-rank missions, build our teamwork back up. There was no teamwork. Rin! He shouted, the volume of his voice rising and his anger surfacing. He tried pushing it back, controlling it a little, but it was no use. She couldn't see, she wouldn't realize why they had to separate, she was blinding herself to it all and it made him furious. There was no teamwork. Anyone could have seen it, we weren't fighting the enemy, we were fighting each other. How the hell can we get our teamwork back? There was never any damn teamwork to begin with, and it was my fault. I know it was my fault, I know I was acting on my own. I know I have to change it, I know I have to fucking control myself. I know all that, so just stop ask. Fuck. The teen swore. He had forgotten that the infant was sleeping and now he was in serious trouble. If guilt was the emotion he had trouble letting surface, anger was the one he had the most trouble suppressing and the one least helpful to the current situation. He was lucky that it was most likely the boy had just been upset. The Jounin didn't think his chakra control would be even remotely stable right now, and Rin was both forbidden from using hers and no better off, emotion-wise. He just had to calm down. Yoshino-san had said that he couldn't manage that, then he couldn't expect the same from the baby. Just breathe. Just let some of the tension go. If you let it go first, then he'll stop crying. Breathe. Ken, should I help? No, damn it, Kakashi snapped at the menin. Shit, I didn't mean Rin, I have to do this myself. I have to take care of him. I can't let everyone else do it for me. I can handle it. All right, she whispered, stepping back and wiping away her tears. She hadn't meant to break down like that. She was just supposed to convince Kakashi that they needed to talk, but her exhaustion was creeping up on her and making her more emotional. If she used this time to calm herself, she might be able to salvage the situation. The real reason she wanted to spend some time with him really had nothing to do with their fractured team, but everything was getting mixed up in her head, and she had bypassed that completely. She watched as Kakashi closed the one eye that wasn't covered by his forehead protector and steadily relaxed, despite the bawling that was coming from his charge. When he seemed to have reached a more tranquil state, he started rocking the baby and shushing it, walking from one side of the hallway to the other. It was a very bizarre image. The copy-nin had proven to be many things: aggressive, confident, arrogant, loyal, calculating, and violent even, but he had never really shown a gentle side. It was nice to see, and Rin began imagining what he would be like when the blue-eyed infant was older and could respond to the Jounin. Maybe taking care of a child would be good for Kakashi. When the boy had calmed down enough that Rin felt she could interrupt, she tried to convince her friend to spend time with her again. I know you don't want anything from me right now, but that's not what I'm asking for. I just want to talk. I need someone to talk to, and you're the only person who can really understand. Please, Kakashi? Just one bowl of ramen, that's all I'm asking. The silver-haired ninja sighed, and rubbed a hand down his face. You really want to do this, don't you? Fine. But that's it. And not just because of us. Anyone can see you need sleep. You shouldn't even be up right now. Rin let out the breath she had been holding in as the other boy turned his back to walk out. He was in a good mood. She turned to the NBU and quickly apologized. Sorry for that. I'm sure we made you uncomfortable. The woman waved a hand, as if to say it was no problem, but in reality it showed how big of a scene the two had made. If she really didn't mind, she wouldn't have twitched a muscle. Hurry up, Rin, Kakashi called back to her in annoyance. The medic nin smiled a little and chased after him. They may not have been a team for quite a while, but the older teen always seemed to fall back into the role of leading when they were around each other. For years ago, only a few months after Obito had died, Yondaime had been chosen for the position of Hokage. Everyone knew that it had been his dream, and his students and friends couldn't have been happier for the Yellow Flash. The resulting celebration had taken place at a ramen stand where the blonde man had proceeded to down a ridiculous amount of food. However, his promotion meant that his workload and responsibilities increased dramatically, and it was too much to expect him to deal with the village problems and finish mentoring a Jounin and menin. Kakashi was reaching a level that surpassed most ninja of his caliber with the help of the Sharingan, and Rin's medical training was becoming more intense. On top of all this, the end of the Third Great Ninja War brought about a need for delicate politics between hidden villages. And delicate was not something normally associated with the Yondaime. The end result was that the two teenagers were given missions together, but frequently with a team leader and or a third team member that they hadn't worked with before. Kakashi did not adapt to this well. He tended to give only the bare minimum of cooperation with anyone who hadn't gained his respect, and his respect was not easily gained, as Obito had proven while he was alive. Obito's death, or rather, the events leading up to his death were not without their mark on Kakashi either. The silver-haired ninja had taken the Uchiho's words to heart, as he began to change his beliefs that emotions were not unnecessary, and was determined to keep his promise to protect Rin. It was possibly the worst combination of convictions that the Jounin could have come up with for himself. Beliefs that are spawned from large events witnessed in one's childhood and carried throughout his or her life are difficult, if not impossible, to change overnight. Kakashi was no exception. His father's suicide had left a scar on the boy, and for 5 years he pushed away his emotions to become a better shinobi, a better weapon. The conclusions he had come to about the cause of his father's death were only reinforced every time he successfully completed a mission to the point that suppressing his feelings had essentially become second nature. So it was that his first issue, trying to let himself experience the emotions that he had suppressed, had him struggling for months. Many people commented that conversations with him were often the most interesting experience they ever had during that time, as the Jounin would appear to be completely uninterested in anything when suddenly his expression would change with no warning. Without any lead-up to his outburst, people had no idea if he would react badly or not, and some of the older, more cocky ninja often provoked him to get some entertainment out of it. Eventually Kakashi got fed up with this, and it resulted in an outburst of anger that seemed to open the floodgates. Controlling the emotions became his next hurdle. Relaxing and enjoying things wasn't so much of a problem when he was on his own because it was usually Rin, who he had asked for help, who had to drag him out to do something that didn't involve training of one sort or another. It was the more negative emotions that he had no experience dealing with that proved the most difficult. Kakashi tended to lash out when he didn't know what to do. Adding to all of this was task of protecting Rin, which had several consequences. To Rin it was almost a guilty pleasure at first. She knew he was doing it because of Obito, and she was also aware that Kakashi wanted her to forget about any other relationship than comrades in the field. But she was also a 14-year-old girl and romantic emotions and notions were not so easily cast aside. It was nice to have the guy she cared about rescue her in pinch. Then, after about a year, she got into serious trouble and sustained an injury that would take some time to heal. She would live, but to Kakashi that wasn't enough. He hadn't been there, hadn't protected her, and he felt both guilty, as if he himself had caused the wound, and that he had failed Obito. Rin had never bothered asking which emotion was the one that had him losing his lunch right in front of her when it became too much. But from that point on his protection became something of a burden. The copy Nin started trying to leave her out of anything that seemed even remotely dangerous which, as a ninja, pretty much meant everything. He had taken on a lone wolf attitude, essentially accomplishing whole missions by himself, and his medic partner began to resent him for it slightly. She was a competent kunoichi, or she wouldn't have made Chunin, and not being allowed to do her job had her reacting by doing the exact opposite of what he ordered occasionally. This only increased his fear that he wouldn't be able to protect her, which was another emotion he still struggled with and turned into anger. The possibility of an argument between the two friends escalated to the point that missions became endangered. It was 2 years after Obito's death that everything came to a head. They had been given a mission where nothing was without risk and Kakashi had been made team leader with hesitance from the Yondaime. The Jounin had insisted that he was capable, and the fact of the matter was that it was true. His completed to failed mission ratio was still excellent, and his teams rarely came back with any major injuries. The deciding factor, however, was the undeniable truth that there was no one available who was better than the copy Nin at the time. Yet, when they reached their destination, he again gave Rin the task with the least amount of risk. Maybe if they hadn't argued before leaving the village. Maybe if her mother hadn't confronted her about her choice of career again that morning. Maybe if it hadn't been that time of the month. Hell, maybe if everything had happened 2 days before, or the weather had been better, she wouldn't have stepped out of line. But it hadn't, and she did, and the resulting injury, not easily treated but possibly life-threatening, was too much for her partner. Kakashi snapped. He did a lot of damage to the enemy, but with no regard to himself or anyone else, and it was only thanks to their third teammate that any of them got out alive. As it was, the brown-haired girl spent 3 weeks recovering and the copy Nin 2 months plus a mandatory psych evaluation ordered by the Hokage himself. He was deemed fit to return to duty by the time he was out of the hospital, but it was 3 more weeks before he could be considered for any serious missions, and Rin was assigned to another, more permanent team long ago. She tried to visit him several times, but after the first one, where he declared it safer if she stayed away from him, he refused to see her. Since then, their separate schedules kept them from even passing each other on the street too frequently. She had made another attempt around the 3rd anniversary of Obito's death when they had not surprisingly run into each other at the memorial stone, and she was more persistent that time, trying to get him to talk about what happened, but he pushed her away again with the same excuse, and eventually her efforts fell by the wayside. That had been several months ago, and today was the first time Rin had really talked to him since then. He was pretty sure that his resistance to her was only weakened because of recent events. Despite that, either of them said a word for the first half of the trip to Ichiraku's. Kakashi hadn't actually asked if that was her intended destination, but considering she really did hate ramen, it was only reasonable to assume she meant it to be somewhat symbolic. Sitting at Sensei's favorite stand, eating his favorite food with his kid, while she tried to have a meaningful conversation with what was left of their team classic, emotional Rin. The medic Nin followed by his side while he played with the infant. The blue-eyed boy hadn't gone back to sleep after his outbursts, and while Kakashi had been shifting the sling around to keep the weight off his ribcage, his hand brushed past the baby who had seized the opportunity to grab the Jounin's pinky. He had tried pulling his hand away, but, as the kid had shown before, he had a pretty strong grip and no desire to let go. The teen had resigned himself to waving his hand around pointlessly, which actually turned out to interest the boy. "You two seem to be getting along well," Rin commented. Something like that," was his response. The brown-haired girl was never really discouraged by his lack of enthusiasm, but she wasn't encouraged by it either. Silence reigned for another few steps. "Things in the hospital are really crazy right now." "Well, that's a bit obvious, isn't it?" She gave a nervous laugh. "But we've managed to save a lot of the critical patients. Not everyone. But a lot of the people we didn't think would make it are fighting hard to survive. It's a little frustrating though. You have to take care of the patients who are in serious condition first, right? But at the same time the others want treatment too, and they keep trying to convince you that they need help. You have to send them away, even when you want to treat them. It makes things hard." That was something to which Kakashi couldn't have responded even if he wanted to. Those were the kind of decisions you had to make as a medic, or a ninja. Personally, the Jounin thought the people who weren't about to die were morons. What did they expect after a large-scale attack? Shinobi healing and medics may have seemed like magic, but even they could only do so much. It was why he hadn't gone to the hospital right away when he knew his ribs were broken. As long as he didn't do anything that could endanger his lungs, he'd be fine. And when things calmed down, he would get them healed completely. Oh! I just remembered, Rin exclaimed. I saw Gaikun in a recovery room. He needed some minor surgery, but he's fine now. I think he said something about healing up in a week, or he'd run around the village 200 times. Guy is an idiot. The silver-haired ninja declared. If he's not running around yelling about the springtime of his youth in 3 days, something really is wrong with him. Until that happens, don't worry about him. The ramen stand was in sight, and it looked as if Ichiraka was handing out meals to workers who had taken a break from rebuilding, so Kakashi couldn't excuse himself on account of it being closed. Wait. Guy. There was something about Guy that I had to take care of. Guy. Guy. The medic Nin looked at him, and jumped at the conversation that seemed to be taking place between them. Something wrong? The green one-piece outfits. I forgot to throw them out. I have to remember that when I get back home. Rin gave him a puzzled look, apparently misunderstanding whose green outfits he was referring to. Never mind. Let's just order. They greeted Ichiraka and his wife, who squealed over the arrival of new baby and brought her 5-year-old daughter out to meet them. Ayam was shy and hid behind her mother's skirt despite encouragement, so to spare the poor girl, her father admonished his wife about ignoring the customers. The woman's enthusiasm brought up the question of the name of the baby again, leaving Rin and Kakashi to begin brainstorming, with Kakashi having the final say. Takashi, are you serious? That's so common. He needs a real name, a unique name. It's too bad he's not a girl. Then you could name him Sakura. How is that original? It's not, but at least it's pretty. Takashi is just plain. Okay, how about Aoi? That one's obvious too, Kakashi. You can't name a kid off the color of his eyes, even if they are really bright. Maybe Akira? It means bright, so you've got the same premise, just not as a parent. Plus, it really fits if he turns out to have the same hair color as Sensei. I don't know. Akira reminds me of that cocky bastard from the academy who thought he was a taijutsu master, or something. I don't think he even graduated. Haruki? Isamu? Kaito? Masaru? Naoki? Osamu? They don't really sound good with his last name. Except maybe the last one. What does it mean? Oh, that's right, I forgot about the last name. I think it means order or restraint, or something. Or maybe it's discipline. It doesn't sound like anything Sensei would think of anyway. Thank you for waiting, the ramen chef said as placed their bowls before them. Rin had actually ordered beef ramen, although Kakashi had a feeling it was more because she had been the one to suggest it than a sudden fondness for it. The jounin had freed his hand from the infant's grasp long ago, but he couldn't really eat over the kid without the risk of hot soup dripping on him, so both shinobi ended up moving their noodles around more than anything. The narutomaki bobbed up and down in the miso as Kakashi poked at it, and he was quiet while racking his brains for more names. Sensei, his funeral, the Rin spoke up quietly. Sandame-sama says they're having his funeral in 2 days. The abrupt change in topic had the copy Nin faltering, and he didn't have a chance to respond before Rin had gone on. He's really dead, isn't he, Kakashi? Sensei, he's really gone. I still have a hard time. Did you see his eyes? Right before it was like he knew he was going to die. But I didn't know how. I couldn't do anything. I couldn't even try. He didn't have any wounds, there was no blood, he was just gone. Tears started streaming down her face for the second time that day. It was worse than Obito. At least Obito was still alive when we were with him. We talked to him before he was gone. But Sensei, it's so pointless. What's the use of being a medic if I can't help my team? What's the point of learning how to save people who can't be saved? Kakashi sat stunned at this sudden revelation. Rin, I'm such an ass. Kakashi had needed to push aside his sadness and anger at the yandame's death to take care of the baby. But of course Rin, the medic, the one who spent most of her time learning how to treat the people she cared about, of course she would have been affected by only being able to announce her mentor's death. I need someone to talk to, and you're the only person who can really understand. Rin hadn't been trying to get him to open up. She had been looking for someone to support her, a shoulder to cry on, and he had tried to brush her off, push her away. He had yelled at her. I'm sorry, Rin. I'm really sorry. God, I feel so stupid. What should he say? What should he tell her? What could he tell her that wasn't a repeat of everything she had just said? Kakashi, promise me. Promise me you won't do anything stupid anymore. Please, just don't do anything that I can't fix. I can't, we're the last two. It's just us, and I don't want to lose you, too. I swear I'll be a friend. I'll be just a comrade to you if you promise not to get hurt like that. If you promise not to die like that. Promise. Take care of Rin. He couldn't. If he kept his promise to Obito, he couldn't promise Rin that he wouldn't do everything to save her. If he gave his promise to Rin, he couldn't guarantee his promise to Obito. But wasn't he already hurting Rin? Wasn't he already breaking his promise by avoiding her? This is a mess. What do I do? I don't know how to fix this. There aren't even any guidelines to follow. How do you reconcile what you feel and what you need to do? How, Obito? Dad, what should I do? I'm sorry, dears, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think the poor boy is getting restless. Ichiraku's wife intruded into his thoughts with her slightly nosy observation and then offered, "You might want to see what he wants before he gets too cranky, and you can't calm him down." "She's right," said Rin, quickly composing herself in the face of catastrophe and wiping away her tears. "He might be hungry. Do you have something to give him?" "I just gave him something to eat," Kakashi exclaimed. "He can't possibly be hungry again. I was going to save the bottle in the bag for lunchtime, if we were out that long." "You'd be surprised," the ramen chef spoke up from where he was stirring a pot in the back. "When Ayam was just born, my wife was so busy taking care of her sometimes I pretty much ran the place by myself. Kids eat a lot when they're that young," the silver-haired teen sighed. "Crap. All right, Rin, do you mind holding him?" I don't want to drop him while I'm getting the stuff too late." He realized that Rin could probably grab it for him, but she had already moved to take the baby in her arms, and as she lifted him up she bumped her arm against the copy-mean's side. "Ow. Damn it. Ow. Young man, you shouldn't swear around children," the woman behind the counter admonished in a way that brought the image of wooden spoons to mind. "Kakashi," the medic Nin said hesitantly as she reached out one arm to push lightly on his injury. "Tell me you aren't walking around with broken ribs." "It's not a big deal. I was going to get it fixed today." He swatted her arm away and swung his backpack around to open it. "It is a big deal. You could have punctured a lung." "I said I'm fine. The hospital couldn't have taken me anyway, you said it yourself." "Here," he shoved the bottle at her so he could put his bag back on. "It should be okay for him to drink right now." "I think they can drink cold milk, can't they?" "I swear, men are such idiots," the brown-haired girl huffed. "You said it, missy," answered the ramen wife. "Hey, I'm starting to wonder if it's okay for you to take him. If you really can handle it, I wouldn't mind. I'm sure my mom would love to help out as well." Rin tipped the formula bottle in the direction of the blue-eyed infant's mouth. "You can't," Kakashi snapped a little, feeling suddenly worried at the prospect of having the kid taken from him for some reason. "You're needed at the hospital. You won't have the time. I'm capable of taking care of him." Rin stared at him a little before acquiescing with a secretive smile, and tried to get the baby to drink some more. He would put his lips around the as if he were about to drink, sometimes taking a sip or two, but then turn his face away and scrunch it up. When his whimpers began turning into tears and he started to squirm in frustration, she turned back to the main guardian, who had started to eat some of his own meal. "He doesn't seem to want this. Does he need a change?" The jounin turned to her. "No. I'd be able to tell, trust me." He tapped the side of his nose. "Maybe we should try that pacifier thing I haven't used." "Wait. Did you say change?" Yeah?" Kakashi groaned. "Not now. This is a really bad time, you stupid bastard," he hissed before looking around to make sure there were no shinobi around who would recognize what he was about to do. When the coast seemed clear, he reached for the boy and began to peel the clothing away to get to his stomach. Sure enough, a bright orange swirl was apparent on the baby's torso. "What are you doing?" Rin whispered as she moved to shield the mark from civilian view. "You should wait to do this until you're somewhere safe. Not out in the open. How are you going to keep it a secret otherwise?" "I'm not going to wait," he whispered back. "You have no idea what we went through yesterday before we figured this out. He shouldn't have to suffer through it again." The copy-nin pressed his hand against the spiral and gave a quick burst. His control was better this time, and no red mark was left behind as the seal faded. "I already checked for other ninja in the area, and most civilians wouldn't know the difference if we lied to them. It worked on Yoshino-san." "Yoshino-san?" asked the mednin in what she hoped was a casual voice. The silver-haired teen had mentioned the person before, but Rin had never heard of her. Kakashi rolled his eyes. "Don't get jealous. She's just the mother from the North District who helped me out. She's the only other person who's seen it." The two of them quickly set about fixing the infant's outfit, and Rin tried with the bottle again to cover up the fact that anything had happened. The kid wasn't really interested in it, but his whimpering and kicking had stopped, so the teenage girl simply held him while Kakashi went back to finishing his ramen. "Everything turn out okay?" asked Ichiraku with a smile a few seconds later. The copy-nin wondered if the chef had taken note of their unusual behavior, but both he and his wife had been engaged in a lively conversation with some new customers. It was most likely the man was simply being friendly. "Yep. Problem solved. Good to hear. Well then, finish enjoying your meal. I don't want to think my cooking is unappreciated, eh?" He gave a hearty laugh and walked back to his stove. Kakashi took another bite and pushed the narutomaki around in his bowl as he chewed. This was going to be a much bigger problem than he had originally thought. The seal was strong enough to cover the weak chakra movements of the fox right now, so there was no way to predict when something was about to happen, and the baby's cries were no more distinctive than when he had a normal problem. The jounin would have to figure out a system of discretion if he were to keep this under wraps. As he thought, the narutomaki began to twirl around in his bowl when he pushed it, the swirl pattern spinning around and around. He stared, letting the optical illusion draw him in. Twisting, turning, twirling, swirling, spiraling. Spiral. The seal goes with his last name, something Sensei would approve of, so it has to be original ramen was his favorite dish. Rasen no narutomaki. "Naruto? What?" asked Rin, looking up from playing peekaboo with the boy. "The name Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto." The medic mean frowned a little. Are you sure? It's original, Kakashi defended his choice, and it fits. It meets all of the criteria. Rin shrugged. Well, it is your choice. She tickled the boy on the stomach. Uzumaki Naruto, huh? You know, it kinda grows on you. I like it. He never described it as dark anymore. It was more black than dark. Rather, it was more of a vacuum where color could not exist in the background, but there was no word to describe the color of a vacuum. It wasn't as if he couldn't see. If he waved his hand in front of his face it was perfectly visible, although his skin seemed dull and lifeless. Strange how he was the one living, yet he always felt less alive in this place. Oh. You're here. He turned around. This was the part he hated. He never knew who exactly he was going to meet, although sometimes he ventured a guess based on what had happened that day. It never really mattered though, because none of them were exactly pleasant. This time it was the 13-year-old boy sitting in midair, legs bent, ankles crossed and arms wrapped around his knees. His left eyelid was closed, sunken in, and it was the only side of him that was visible. It's you this time? Don't sound so annoyed. You'd think you'd be at least a little happy to see me. You're dead, and you're alive. I'm sorry. Wait, this is about blame? Sorry, I thought we were just stating facts. In that case, you totally cheated during that training session 2 years ago. Sensei wasn't paying attention, but I know you moved. I just couldn't prove it. The dead boy always talked as if time hadn't passed at all in the waking world. He had stopped correcting him after the 3rd year of nightmares. What do you want? A drop of blood that was always flowing down the 13-year-old's right hand fell and suddenly the scenery expanded from an unexplainable ripple it caused. Instead of midair, the boy was sitting on an obsidian rock that acted as his tombstone, a string of kanji running endlessly down it. Across from his perch were 3 wooden posts, and beyond it a vast training field surrounded by trees. Everything, including the dead boy, seemed really vibrant and colorful, while his own image was still tinted with gray. The boy smiled. Doesn't it bring back memories? It did. Too many. And every time he went over them he could pinpoint everything he should have done differently, every mistake he made, every stupid word that he wished he could take back. He only rarely came to train here when he really wanted to punish himself in a way no one else could. The brown-haired boy sighed and rested his head on his knees. If I didn't know you were a genius ninja, I'd wonder how you ever got anywhere in life. You've got one good eye and one supremely awesome eye, if I do say so myself, but you still can't see the things you should be looking at. A hand went up to the headband over the left side of his face. It wasn't that he was ashamed of it. He treasured that eye, but the stares from people who knew nothing about him, or its history still made him self-conscious. He didn't want questions. He didn't want to relive those painful memories. I'm trying. It's not as easy as it looks. I have to protect her from myself now, too. I've told you that. The head came up, although it didn't turn to face him. I know. You were never a crybaby like me. He winced. You're doing your best to change and that's what counts. But you're still looking at all the wrong things. I don't understand. I know that too. But you will. Soon. If things work out. That's why I'm here. What? You have to leave, Kakashi. You have to go back. You mean wake up? I've tried. I can't do it until you're done talking. Not the dream. The dead boy lifted his left arm to point past the wooden posts. You have to go back. You can't stay here. Hurry. There isn't much time. He might not be saved if you don't get him out. You have to go back. Who are you taking about? Obito? I don't get it. Who might not be saved? Suddenly the boy stepped down from the stone seat and moved toward him. His right side was a mess, arm mostly torn off and barely attached by a flap of skin, bones sticking out everywhere, face nearly flattened. His right leg dragged behind him as he lurched forward and blood drenched the grass, as it seemed to gush out of every part of his body. Hurry, Kakashi. There isn't much time. You can't stay here. You can't be late. Sensei is counting on you. The right arm that wasn't connected enough to be able to respond reached for him as he took a step back, but the fingers that were too smashed to move grasped the front of his vest before he could get away. Are you listening? You have to leave. Kakashi, go. Naruto. What did you do with your sippy cup yesterday? I've looked all over this house and I can't find it. Kakashi stood in the doorway of the living room, hands running through his hair in frustration and irritation. They were late, again. And while the 18-year-old would have gladly sacrificed the search for the small container to promptness, Naruto had a habit of throwing a small tantrum when he was told he couldn't carry it around. Unfortunately, he also had a habit of leaving it in the oddest places when he had finished with it, and Kakashi had frequently needed to buy a new one when it seemed to have been swallowed up by the universe. The current sippy cup was green and blue with smiling orange sea stars and happy yellow fish swimming around, but no less visible for it. Naruto, who was playing with blocks on the floor and had his back towards the doorway, turned his head at the sound of his name and smiled. Ka! The silver-haired teen sighed before walking over to the boy and kneeled down to his level. Sometimes, when all else failed, Naruto could find his favorite piece of glassware better than any ninja dog if asked. It was probably quicker than Kakashi searching for it himself, but his pride still refused to allow him to admit that a lifetime of ninja training left him inferior to a near 1.5-year-old. Hey Naruto, The blonde-haired boy held up one of his blocks as an offering to his guardian. Kakashi took it absent-mindedly and continued. Can you help me find your juice cup? The boy's eyes lit up at the mention of juice and he began to quickly crawl through the doorway to the kitchen, towards the back of the house. As the Jounin had already searched the room several times already, he was about to give the cup up as a lost cause when Naruto pulled himself up using a chair and carefully toddled over to the window that looked out to the backyard. He wasn't tall enough to see over the windowsill, so Kakashi, still hopeful that he wouldn't have to spend another $5 on something that wouldn't last a month, picked the kid up. Naruto pointed out the window to the old tree stump that stood in the middle of the yard, left over from the tree that had collapsed 3 years ago in a bad storm. Cup, he exclaimed before turning to look at Kakashi and repeating, cup. Sure enough, sitting on top of the log was the little green and blue devil, mocking the Jounin in all its obvious glory. The only thing missing from the scene was a beam of sunlight shooting down to frame the damn thing. He sighed and walked back into the living room to place his charge back among the mess of toys that had surrounded him. You have to stop leaving your things in the backyard when we play out there. Stay here, I'll be right back. The silver-haired teen ran out the only door into and out of the house in the front, and went around the back to grab the all-important item. He shook it in disgust as it was still wet from the slight shower they had gotten the night before and quickly ran back to the house so he could wash it, dry it, and fill it with Naruto's favorite beverage, orange juice. Kakashi placed it in the bag with the rest of Naruto's things, then spent the next 10 minutes trying to wrangle the blonde into a jacket and get some sandals on him. Finally, they were ready to leave. The Jounin swung the bag over his shoulders with practiced ease, lifted the blonde 1-year-old up effortlessly and headed for the door. With luck and a little haste they could make it within half an hour of the original appointed time. Are we ready to go? I think we've got everything, don't you? He asked the blue-eyed boy in his arms. Naruto happily babbled something unintelligible in return as he always did and Kakashi opened the door. YOSH. Kakashi, my eternal rival. Today is the day to show the springtime of our youth. Hurry! We must train against each other to increase our youthfulness. This time I will defeat you. If I do not, then the punishment will be 500 push-ups with one finger. Come! The speaker, or rather the shouter, stood in the middle of the path that led up to the Copynin's house holding a strange pose as if ready for a camera at any moment. His hair was in the shape of a bowl cut unlike any other and his teeth, which were shown off through an enormous grin, sparkled against the sunlight. Guy, Kakashi sighed, an occurrence that had already happened far too frequently this morning. Mato Guy had an uncanny habit of appearing just when he least expected it, or least wanted it for that matter, and announcing their rivalry in volumes inappropriate for any time of day, let alone morning. It wasn't that he hated the man's presence, or that he felt the other shinobi was an incompetent moron. The overenthusiastic teen's Jounin best was proof enough of that had Kakashi not experienced the 3 years of spontaneous competition and training, and Guy could actually be sensible in the field. It was more the fact that their personalities clashed. Whereas Guy put his whole heart into being the best at everything taijutsu with a little flamboyance, Kakashi was all about efficiency and composure with more focus on his ninjutsu, thanks to the implanted Sharingan. This meant that there was only a few hours' time of leeway that the Copynin could put up with the fuzzy-eyebrowed man before it quickly dissolved into annoyance. Even now Guy's sudden appearance was testing Kakashi's last nerve, as it was the latest occurrence in a string of bad incidents that morning. Naruto, however, had no such burdens and gave off a high-pitched laugh at the older man's antics. I'm glad somebody appreciates your theatrics, Kakashi grumbled. Weren't we supposed to meet at the training field? Guy stepped out of his ridiculous pose, only to strike a new one with an outstretched thumbs up in his rival's direction. Once again, Kakashi, your hip ability to stay calm despite your excitement is overwhelming. I must work harder to match this amazing ability. He stepped closer, still keeping his thumbs up sign although he held his arm closer to his body, and leaned down to come face to face with the young blonde in the Copynin's arms. Hello, little one. You, too, must show the springtime of your youth along with us. Are you ready? Naruto laughed even harder, leaning his weight back as he did so that Kakashi had to work to make sure the boy didn't suddenly slide out of his arms. When the blue-eyed child was done with that he suddenly reached forward to pull on Guy's hair. As the younger Jounin untangled his charge's grasp he said pointedly, none of that answers my question. Guy pulled back to a safer distance and both he and Kakashi started walking forward towards their destination as he answered. There was a small mix-up in the scheduling. One of the Genin teams was somehow signed up at the same time as us for Field 2. Since you didn't show up on time it was pointless to try and keep our slot, so I relinquished it to them. Wonderful, the silver-haired teen thought, another issue to deal with. Should I have even bothered getting up this morning? Out loud he said, alright, we'll just have to see if another field is open for us, or get permission to train outside the training grounds if we need to. That might take a while though. How much time do you have? Plenty, Guy responded. I have an A rank that starts tomorrow, so there is again, nothing pressing until then. He struck his nice guy pose although Kakashi ignored him, and kept walking. Today I will devote myself to improving my technique against my eternal rival. If you have an A rank maybe you should be training with your team in preparation. The Copynin called back. Perhaps. The older Jounin shrugged and ran to catch up with his younger comrade. But we all know each other well, and plus there would be no one for you to work with. It's not as if there are many left who can fight on an equal level with you, even as young as we are. That's true, agreed Kakashi, ever confident in his abilities, and then a companionable semi-silence fell over the two. Guy was never one to stay quiet, or still for long, but he knew when conversation with the silver-haired jounin was futile, and so he took to humming and basic exercises like walking on his hands backwards. Kakashi, on the other hand, was lost in thought. Ever since that dream the night before, nothing had gone right, down to the little, tiny, pointless things. Normally it wouldn't have registered as more than an annoyance on his part, but the dream was making him irritable and edgy. It had been a lot clearer and more vivid than any of the normal nightmares, and seemingly more random too, but he had experienced random dreams before and none of them had seemed quite as purposeful as this one had. The problem was, now that he was awake and had been focused on getting breakfast for himself and Naruto, who invariably got more food on the floor and walls than he did in his stomach, he couldn't really remember what the dream had been telling him. The copy felt as if maybe someone had been in danger. Could he have? Suddenly Kakashi's world went dark. It took a moment to realize what had happened, but then he pushed the right side of his Hittite back up and turned to the little boy in his arms. Sorry kid, he apologized. I haven't been paying much attention to you, have I? Naruto's response was to try and reach for the headband again to pull it down, which resulted in a small battle between the teen and the boy to see who could exert their will over the blue cloth, which devolved into a tickling session that even had Kakashi smiling under his mask. Kakashi wasn't sure when Naruto had developed an affinity for playing with his Hittite, only that it had started out with attempts to push it up and reveal the Jounin's Sharingan. The silver-haired teen had wondered if it wasn't an endeavor to make his face symmetrical as, at the time, the blue-eyed boy had played with most of his toys by lining them up somewhat neatly, or if Naruto just liked the way the red eye looked. In any case, the copy still hadn't been eager to reveal the borrowed eye and somehow managed to convey that this was not something he approved of to the blonde. But it also didn't stop the kid as he turned his attention to the other side of Kakashi's face and began to cover the copy bare eye. This wasn't nearly as big a crime in the Jounin's book, and it amused Naruto enough that it had turned into a game to see if the toddler could get past his guardian's defenses. Then, by accident, he had discovered that it was also a great attention-getting device as it caused Kakashi to stop whatever he was doing due to a lack of vision. Guy soon joined in on their mock battle in his own enthusiastic way, as no one who knew the young blonde seemed able to resist his charms for long. At one point Naruto reached his hands out to the older Jounin and ended up in his arms, though Kakashi still kept a close eye on the two. Naruto was still prone to Kyuubi attacks and Guy wasn't in on the secret. If he found out, the copy wasn't sure that even the taijutsu master wouldn't try for some type of revenge. He's getting big, Guy commented once they had settled down a little. You will have to enroll him in the academy soon. He's only 1.5. Even I wasn't that young when I started out. 4 years old is not as far off as you might think, Kakashi. I think he will turn out to be an excellent ninja as well. Maybe even become a taijutsu specialist. I could become his sensei and you and I would train him to be the strongest fighter in all of Konoha. Youthfulness is such a wonderful thing. Naruto, my new student, you must work hard to achieve greatness and I, your hip sensei, will encourage you all the way. Isn't that right, my rival? Kakashi had sudden images of a blonde bowl cut with a hideously clashing green jumpsuit and shivered with the horror of it. He had to restrain himself from snatching the boy out of Guy's hands, instead settling for a simple, hell no. Besides, if he's like his father, he won't have the body for taijutsu. He'll probably be a ninjutsu master, if anything. Now hand him back over, he's starting to squirm. Guy, who had just about as much clue as to what a baby needed as Kakashi had when Naruto had first arrived at his house, luckily handed the boy over without much question. Ugh, the copy groaned as he took him back. You are getting big. Whatever happened to the little bundle I first met? Naruto didn't answer, of course, but his normally cheerful expression had become somewhat somber as he continued to move around in apparent discomfort. Soon he began to suck his thumb, grip the front of his shirt in the other hand, and lay his head on Kakashi's shoulder. XXXXXX. Not much had happened in the year and 4 months that passed after Naruto received his name. The Yondaime Hokage's funeral was held 2 days later, as Rin has explained. It didn't rain, or anything so cliché, but white clouds floated across a pale blue sky and passed over the sun, casting a shadow on the large crowd that attended. Kakashi had stood beside Rin to offer a shoulder, but true to her shinobi teachings, the medic Nin had given her sensei a respectable send-off with no tears. In the end he had needed to leave early anyway because the Kyuubi acted up during the middle of the service, and the copy Nin wasn't so naive as to think he could hide the seal. In a crowd of elite Konoha ninja, as his original assignment was to protect Naruto, Kakashi spent most, if not all, of his time taking care of the boy. The day-to-day tasks of baby care became routine with much help from Yoshino-san who, it turned out, did not know everything and was often learning alongside him. After about 2 months he managed to create a daily schedule that involved some free time and turned his attention to his quickly fading shinobi abilities. During one of Naruto's several naps of the day, Kakashi had tested his body's limits. His chakra control had actually improved slightly from using the short, small burst to suppress the demon, but his taijutsu was abysmal. It wasn't that his form had dissolved, but rather that after only an hour of practice his breath came up short, and his speed was only at the level of an experienced chunin. He was slightly horrified with this discovery and spent the next day trying to convince the Hokage why he needed someone else to watch Naruto for a few weeks while he trained his body back up to an optimal level. In the end, Sandaime refused the silver-haired shinobi's demand, but instead suggested that he take an hour or two every day in which someone else would watch over the boy while Kakashi enhanced his skills. Both men were reluctant to leave the blonde infant in the hands of anyone else, but it was obvious that if they didn't do something, take some small risk, the copynin wouldn't be fit to keep the position of protection either. Kakashi relented, asking that, in addition to an ANBU guard, Naruto be put under the care of Nara Yoshino-san if she would agree to it. He reasoned that it was easier than having to train an ANBU in all the quirks and habits of the boy when there was someone who was already familiar with them. He had already had to explain to the woman that the protective seal was more permanent than he had first thought, and that it would take elaborate and complicated measures to remove it which would be potentially harmful to Naruto. It was the best excuse he could come up with, but he had gotten to know Yoshino-san well enough to realize that she was an incredibly intelligent woman, and that his fabrication wouldn't stand up to her close scrutiny. Sure enough, she eventually called him on his bluff but went on to admit that, however uneasy she was with it, the Hokage was obviously involved in giving his approval. Yoshino-san also admitted to recognizing that it was probably for her own protection that she didn't know the truth, and promised not to pry into it, even going so far as to reluctantly agree never to mention it to Shikaku when Kakashi pushed her to. By the time the babysitting ordeal was being hashed out, the Kyuubi had begun to settle to the point that it only reared its head several times a week, as opposed to several times every day. Over the months they had decreased even more so that they only experienced 3 or 4 a week. The attacks were far enough apart that the Jounin now very rarely returned to the Nara household to find a crying baby awaiting him. Sandaime-sama had hypothesized that Kyuubi wasn't getting weaker, unfortunately, just that it had begun to resign itself to its fate. Kakashi secretly hoped that it would one day resign itself to the point of extinction, however unreasonable that was. XXXXX. Speaking of the Kyuubi, it seemed as if he had decided to make his presence known again. Naruto was still pretty quiet, and his thumb sucking was always a good indicator that he was uncomfortable or upset, but more than that he was really starting to tug at his shirt. This was the biggest sign that something was wrong. The blonde had been conditioned not to reveal his stomach unless told, but pulling on his shirt meant that he was simply waiting for the signal. Hey guy, would you mind going on ahead and letting Yoshino-san know that I'm on the way? Kakashi asked, trying to get rid of the fuzzy-eyebrowed man. I'd do it myself, but running with Naruto is a little awkward. I just don't want her thinking I've forgotten. Leave it to me. I will carry everything and still beat my record time. If not, I must do 400, no, 500 laps with weights around the village. No, that's alright, he assured the older Jounin, trying to keep the annoyance out of his voice. This was where the taijutsu ninja's exuberance became a problem. Just go ahead is all. Please, he added, trying to be polite. The green-clad shinobi faltered with a disappointed look on his face. Are you sure? Perhaps we could turn it into a contest. No, was the firm reply. Look, this is really important. If nobody goes ahead, the ANBU guard is going to get worried. It'll be a big problem if a fuss is raised because we weren't on time. The Hokage will not be happy. Yes. That would not be a good thing, Guy agreed, but instead of running forward he stopped walking altogether. Kakashi, he called when the silver-haired teen didn't stop. He turned with some exasperation. Naruto was starting to burrow his head in his shoulder, meaning the Kyuubi was getting pushy, and if Guy didn't leave soon he would start crying. What is it? You are hiding something, aren't you? Damn it. Now was not the time for this conversation. Look Guy, is it concerning Naruto? The taijutsuist asked. He paused slightly. I can't answer that, Kakashi told him, trying to head everything off and get the older Jounin out of there. But it is on the orders of the Hokage, correct? You aren't keeping this because of when I call us rivals, he trailed off. Was that what this was about? Did Guy really think that he would keep a simple secret this thoroughly because of a self-proclaimed rivalry? Sure, he wasn't exactly ready to spill his guts to the other man, but the fuzzy-eyebrow Jounin was also the closest thing Kakashi had to a friend for a long while, despite his annoying tendencies. Still, if he admitted that, it would definitely reveal that there was something very important to hide. It was already difficult enough to keep things quiet, and the Hokage had begun to confide to the copynin that he wasn't sure how much longer it would stay a secret. If it would get you to stop asking questions, I'll tell you this, he offered. There are things I won't tell even Yoshino-san right now. The Hokage wants to give Naruto a chance at a normal childhood. I'm just doing the best I can. That was all the silver-haired teen could say, and it would be up to Guy to form his own conclusions. Fortunately it seemed to be an acceptable answer, and with a nod Guy took off. With relief, Kakashi stepped off of the path and did a quick routine visual sweep of the area to make sure they were truly alone. Seeing no one else around, he knelt down and sat Naruto on the ground, since it was easier than juggling the boy in his arms while helping him. Sorry for the wait, kiddo, he apologized. Go ahead, shirt up. Used to the routine by now, the little blonde toddler took the hem of his shirt and lifted it up until it was covering his face. Sure enough, the seal had shown itself again, although it was dull compared to its original color, no longer violent red-orange, but instead a kind of ember glow. The copynin made quick work of it, and then coaxed Naruto to bring the shirt back down. All done, Kakashi reassured the boy. What do you say we actually make it all the way to Shikamaru-kun's this time? Naruto's only response was to lift his arms for his guardian to pick him up and laid his head quietly on the teen's shoulder. Just one more reason to loathe the Kyuubi, thought the Jounin. Normally Naruto was a very happy kid, constantly laughing and babbling even when not half of it was anything intelligible. The only time he really became silent was when he felt the Kyuubi chakra, as if he knew the danger that lurked beneath his own skin. He would perk up eventually, but until then his eerie silence would grate on Kakashi. The rest of their trip was unhindered and they arrived at the Nara household to find a slightly annoyed A&B ready to greet them. The man gave a short lecture on promptness that the Jounin felt was vaguely reminiscent of his past lectures to Obito. Since Naruto had arrived at his house, Kakashi had received several like them and had at first attempted to explain, or at least apologize for his lateness, but had eventually given up when he realized that most ninja were about as understanding as he had been at 13. Now he politely stood and waited for the ANBU to finish, agreed with the man to the guard's surprise, and walked past him into Yoshino-san's home. The scene that presented itself was not entirely surprising. Guy seemed to love children, despite the fact that he had no idea how to raise one and his face often scared a few of them. So Kakashi wasn't startled to find the older Jounin trying to entertain a nearly 2-year-old Shikamaru in his own loud way. The only problem with this was that nothing ever seemed to faze the black-haired toddler. In fact, just as Guy was reaching the height of his performance, Shikamaru-kun gave a big yawn. Yoshino smiled and rolled her eyes at her son just in time to notice Kakashi's entrance. "Oh good, you're here. Right on time," she called out from the kitchen where she was washing dishes. He raised an eyebrow. "On time? I thought we were 20 minutes late." The black-haired woman shook her head and smiled again. "You're always, remarkably, punctually late. I've started planning my day around the idea that you'll show up 20 minutes later than you say." The silver-haired Jounin only hummed at the implication. Yoshino jerked her thumb in the direction of the living room that could be seen through the opening in the wall of the kitchen. "Shika-chan is in the living room if you want to set Naruto down in there. I imagine you'll need to pull Guy-san away as well." She frowned suddenly. "Is he alright?" "Who, Guy?" "Believe it or not, he's been acting pretty sane lately." Another eye roll, but this time in exasperation. "I mean Naruto. He doesn't look like he's feeling very well." The silver-haired Jounin waved her concern off as he walked into the living room to put Naruto down. "He'll be fine," he reassured the mother. "Just let him and Shikamaru-kun play together for a bit." "About that, I was wondering if it would be okay with you if I took them to the park," Yoshino suggested. "I think they've been feeling cooped up lately. And Shikaka said he would try to come home for lunch if he got out of that big meeting they were calling everyone for today, so you two are welcome to join us after your training." "Meeting?" Guy questioned. "I haven't heard anything about that." "Do you know what it's about, Nara-san?" "Not really. Shikaka didn't say much, although I don't think it was called directly by the Hokage. Maybe a messenger of his?" Kakashi was starting to get a bad feeling, although he wasn't quite sure why. He hadn't heard anything about a meeting either, but it was possible that he had missed the hawk that usually signaled large gatherings. An image of Obito's bloody dream corpse suddenly flashed through his head and he clenched his fists in reflex. "Don't go to the park." The adults in the room turned to look at the copynin, giving him wondering looks at his forceful statement. It had come out more as a command than a refusal, but he didn't take it back. "Yoshino-san, don't go to the park." "Not today. Maybe some other time, or even after I get back, but just stay home. Just don't go out." He was about to add please, but a wash of fear overtook him and the please became, "Promise me." Yoshino raised her eyebrow at this. Kakashi, who was normally very reserved, now had worry displayed all over his face and in his body language. Even Guy looked vaguely troubled at the younger man's reaction, but he didn't contradict his comrade. The black-haired mother couldn't see why a meeting would set off warning signals in these two Jounin, but she had gotten to know the copynin, and had heard enough about his field sense from rumors Shikaka had gathered that she trusted his judgment. That being said, she filed this in her brain under suspicious actions of the Hatake family to be wondered about in detail later. "All right, I promise," she agreed, although she wondered if that was such a good idea as she remembered the last promise she had made to the silver-haired teen about keeping secrets from Shikaku. Not for the first time, she thought that perhaps she should back out of the agreement to take care of the young Naruto while she still could, but the boy was such a joy to be around that she was loath to give it up. Besides, how dark of a secret could a 1-year-old be hiding? "I suppose I'll just have to get creative when they start feeling cooped up." Kakashi didn't answer, instead turning away to his young charge. The blue-eyed boy was sucking his thumb again, and the Jounin gently tugged the offending hand out of his mouth. Standing the kid on his feet so as to be on the same level with him, Kakashi tried to keep the worry out of his voice as he said, "You be good while I'm gone, okay? Stay inside, don't run around too much. I'll just be gone for a little while." Naruto, who couldn't possibly understand what he had been told, tilted his head slightly at the strange tone of voice he was hearing. No one had ever really spoken to him like that before, but it didn't feel good and he wanted to start on his thumb as soon as he got it back. That always made him feel a little better. Not knowing what else to do until it was released, he pointed over at his friend and announced loudly, "Sure." Kakashi sighed and put a hand on Naruto's blonde head as he stood, knowing that anything he said was more likely to reassure himself than it would the kid. Come on, guy, let's go. If we don't hurry, we'll never get a spot. He let the boy go, the 1-year-old's thumb going straight to his mouth, as he toddled over to Shikamaru-kun to bother the older boy. The two jounin walked to the door, Guy giving off a last nice to see you again to Yoshino-san as he stepped out. Kakashi looked back one last time to see that Naruto hadn't moved from his original position, but the black-haired mother tried to reassure him with a smile and said, "Everything will be fine. Worst comes to worst, we have an ANBU guard," as she closed the door. To the copynin it seemed to give off an ominous click as he replied, "Yeah," and walked away. "You have got to be kidding me." Guy looked over at his silver-haired comrade standing next to him as they surveyed the last training field that had been available. "We could try requesting approval for going outside the grounds," he suggested. They stood before a field that seemed no different from any other, so to speak. Yet the taijutsu ninja knew from previous conversations about where they would be sparring that this was the field Kakashi had first trained on with his former team. He also knew that the copynin avoided it like the plague. Unfortunately, with such short notice, it was a miracle that they had landed any type of field at all. There was a moment where the younger jounin was tempted to turn around and admit defeat. The gods were obviously amusing themselves with his pain, and there seemed to be no stopping them today. Attempting to be optimistic and thinking that anything would go right was a pointless endeavor. However, it was exactly for this reason that he stood his ground. The earlier talk with Yoshino-san had sent a creeping feeling through his body that something dangerous was stirring in the village, and Kakashi was sure that now more than ever, he needed to be prepared. "Let's go," he said, stepping out on the field. Guy followed him to the middle of the grounds and they spent a few minutes warming up. Normally they would have gradually done so throughout their fight instead of beforehand. But between Guy's A rank the next day and Kakashi's sense of danger flaring up, neither felt they could afford to injure themselves through insufficient preparation and become incapacitated. Suddenly, without any visible signal, both men stood facing each other in stances that would give anyone with an untrained eye the impression that their guard was down. To each of the jounin, however, it was apparent that the other fighter was covering all his weak points and any openings were likely the beginnings of a trap. "What's this?" questioned Kakashi, friendly sarcasm laced through his voice. "No shouting, no posing? Guy, are you actually taking this seriously for once?" "Ha!" Guy smirked as he picked up the banter. "Make no mistake, my rival. All of our battles are serious matters. However, you are correct in your observation that today is doubly so, for I have decided that our fight here shall be a contest. The score is 20-20. My decisive win will show that I am indeed the stronger man. Should I fail to do so, however, I will double my training as punishment." "Humph," came the reply. Truth be told, Kakashi had no clue what were the requirements for declaring that a sparring session would be a contest, and so Guy had been the one to initiate all 40 of them. "I knew you couldn't stay quiet for long. But Kakashi, I see that you, too, have yet to take me seriously. Aren't you going to use your Sharingan?" It was meant to be something of a joke, a reference to their younger days. Back when the Sharingan was still new and the silver-haired boy's arrogance in his own abilities was strong enough that Guy hadn't even registered on his radar. The green jumpsuit-clad Chunin had challenged him to a match. It was the first of many contests to come, and when Kakashi had finally accepted that Guy was a worthy opponent during their fight, he had tried using the Sharingan. Needless to say, he was rather surprised to find that it was useless against the other boy's mastery of taijutsu alone. It was the only time Guy had ever been ahead in wins, as Kakashi's 2 successive victories afterward kept him in the lead. "Childish tricks like that won't work on me anymore," was the copynin's serious reply, and silence fell between the two as they both anticipated the other's first attack. With no warning, the image of Kakashi disappeared as he rushed forward, and the metallic clang of kunai signaled the start of the match. About an hour after Kakashi and Guy had left, Yoshino was beginning to wonder why she had ever questioned Naruto's well-being. True, he had started out quiet enough, still sucking his thumb, but Shikamaru had quickly realized that something was wrong, and in his own, nearly 2-year-old way decided to offer some comfort. "Nara-chan, up!" he had demanded as he wrapped his arms around the torso of the blue-eyed boy and struggled to pull his playmate into a standing position. "We gonna go out?" The blonde was of little help as he made no effort to keep his legs underneath him, and soon both boys had toppled backwards. Yoshino had listened carefully for any tears in case either toddler had boo-boos that needed attention, but they seemed to be all right. Shikamaru actually sighed in exasperation instead. "Come on, Nara-chan," he whined. "Sure?" was Naruto's reply from his position, lying on his back across Shikamaru's stomach. It was obvious he was curious as to what was going on, but to Yoshino it only sounded like the same syllable the blue-eyed toddler always used to address everyone in the Nara family. Clearly, this was not the case, as a year of play dates had allowed Shikamaru to speak fluent Naratese. "Dummy. We gonna see clouds. Clouds are fun. It make Nara-chan better, but we gotta go out." "Shikamaru, don't call other people names," his mother admonished him. "Say you're sorry." "Sorry," the black-haired boy said immediately with complete seriousness. It was a very serious matter when his mom told him to do something. If he didn't, he could be punished. "Mama, Nara-chan's gotta see clouds so he gets better." "Like daddy?" So that's what this was about, the woman thought. Whenever Shikamaru got upset, which was rare but happened on occasion, and his dad was around, Shikaku would take his son out to the lawn and the two would lay in the grass and stare up at the clouds as the younger Nara male curled against his father's side and his tears subsided. It was their special ritual that even Yoshino wasn't allowed in on. She was surprised that Shikamaru would let an outsider participate in the tradition. I'm not sure Naruto-chan wants to go outside yet, honey. I'm glad you're being so thoughtful, but why don't you wait a while and then I can take you both out, just to the front yard though. Naruto's not allowed to go to the park today. Shikamaru gave the blonde head of his playmate a frown of disappointment, since he couldn't face Naruto directly. Trouble, he grumped. Yoshino hid a smile at the modification to her husband's favorite phrase. She had a feeling that one day it would perfectly describe the son of the yondaime. Then suddenly, out of the blue, Naruto perked up. Sure! He cried, rolling away from Shikamaru onto the floor and his stomach. Block! A chubby hand was lifted in the direction of a chest stuffed with toys, including the beloved colored blocks that Naruto always seemed to favor, and he began crawling toward it. Shikamaru stuck out his tongue at the younger boy. Not gonna play now. Too tired. As if to prove his point, he gave a huge yawn and rolled over, resting his head on his hands. Naruto, however, was not about to let his friend off the hook. The older toddler's kindness was apparently enough to cheer him up and he was back to his familiar antics. Once he convinced Yoshino to help him open the toy chest, which was accomplished through a series of demanding cries, sure. Block. He made his way back over to the lazy, black-haired boy, dragging the bucket of building blocks behind him as he scooted on his butt and dumped the entire thing over Shikamaru's outstretched body. Shikamaru, not surprisingly, did not appreciate the humor in this, and from then on it was war. The next hour continued in a cycle of small fights between the two toddlers as Naruto provoked Shikamaru, periods where they played relatively quietly together, and moments where Shikamaru was bored with whatever they had been doing and Naruto was left to his own devices. For the most part, Yoshino was able to go about doing her daytime chores without giving the children too much supervision, but currently she was keeping a lookout from the corner of her eye. They were at the Naruto and his devices stage, and this time it consisted of unsteadily running around the living room in circles, squealing with delight at the top of his lungs. It was highly amusing to the blonde boy, but Yoshino was afraid he would fall and hit his head on one of the many toys that were now scattered about, and Shikamaru was showing signs of severe annoyance. Yoshino sighed and realized that it was time to take things outdoors. Alright boys, let's get your sandals on and head out. Shika-chan, do you still want to look at the clouds with Naruto-chan? I don't want you two to get grass stains on your clothes, so if you do I'm going to grab a blanket you can lie down on. Shikamaru slowly got up from his latest resting place on the couch and leisurely walked over to the front entrance of the house where everyone's footwear was, only tripping over his feet once. He replied with a shrug and a grunt that sounded neither negative nor positive. That's not an answer, Shika-chan, his mother admonished gently. Yes or no? He whined a little, I dunno. To trouble. Yoshino rolled her eyes and scolded, don't talk to me that way. You should be polite, and answer when I ask a question. I swear, you get more and more like your father every day. She decided she would take one out just in case and turned her attention to the blonde tornado still making his rounds. Come on, Naruto, she said as she scooped him up mid-circle. He laughed happily at being caught, and then found an interest in the mother's shoulder-length hair. As he grabbed a handful and fanned it out, letting it fall from his fingers, Yoshino's mind wandered. Why did this little bundle of energy in her arms seem so important? Yes, he was the son of the last Hokage, but why did that warrant all this protection? Kakashi's first job was not caregiving as he pretended, although he was much better at it now. It was to guard Naruto. And why did a toddler need an ANBU soldier standing outside of his babysitter's home? Would enemies of Konoha really try to assassinate the young son of dead leader? A small finger reached out to tap Yoshino on the nose, a game the blue-eyed child had learned from her. She smiled uncertainly back at him, and he gave a bright grin that was so characteristic. What dark secret could such a happy child have? She was beginning to worry, not for Naruto, but for her own family, however selfish that may have been. With Kakashi's concern about the going-ons of the village on her mind, the young mother decided that later tonight, when Naruto was gone and Shikamaru was in bed, she would break her promise to keep silent to her husband. For a while now she had felt as if the secrecy was a betrayal to their marriage, and she couldn't keep it up any longer. Shikamaru already had his sandals halfway on, his mother noticed as she came nearer, and that seemed to be sufficient enough for him. Yoshino was a little more practical and wanted them to stay on, so she helped pull them over his feet the rest of the way. Patiently the black-haired boy sat and waited while she moved on to the more active of the two boys, who refused to simply let his shoes be put on as usual. Suddenly he spoke up. Naruto-chan's a little brother, right mama? What? She said in surprise. The idea of siblings had never been brought up before. Like Hideki-kun over there? Shikamaru pointed toward the wall on his right, which Yoshino interpreted to mean their next-door neighbors. Arata-kun was the older boy and Hideki-kun his younger brother. Do you mean is Naruto-chan your little brother? Shikamaru shrugged. He had asked the question because he wasn't entirely sure what a little brother was exactly, let alone whether he had one of his own or not. Well, kind of, his mother answered. I mean, the two of you aren't related, but when he gets a little older Naruto-chan will probably start looking up to you. So in that sense, yes. He's like your little brother. The 2-year-old pondered this for a moment with his head tilted back. Then he looked back down, gave a decisive nod and said K. Soon after they exited the house the blanket was indeed laid out on the grass, but neither boy had made extensive use of it. Shikamaru had lain down for a moment, but Naruto's A&BU guard, who hovered over the 1-year-old boy as if assassins would rain down on him any moment now, had inspired the black-haired toddler to play with his wooden toy shuriken. None of them were aimed anywhere in particular. Shikaka had said that the idea was for him to get used to throwing them. They could work on target practice when he was in the academy. For now Yoshino was roped into searching for renegade throwing stars in the grass when Shikamaru threw them far enough away that they weren't in his immediate vicinity. It was while she was searching for one of these that she happened to look down the road, only to notice a figure dashing towards them. Shikaka! You're home already? That was fast. I thought the meeting would go on longer. It's a little early for lunch and I invited Kakashi anyway, but I can whip something. Yoshino, her husband, interrupted her as he got closer. His expression was serious, not the lazy, devil-may-care attitude that he usually exuded but rather the battle-hardened face that she had only seen a few times. Sorry, I know you were expecting me later. Don't worry about lunch right now, things have kind of changed and I'll probably be staying home the rest of the day. He gave her an I'm home kiss on the lips, but it was quick and she had a feeling it was supposed to reassure her more than anything. That meant her anxiety factor went up about 5 times. Honey, what's wrong? Kakashi was acting strangely earlier too, when I told him where you went. Something's going on. What's happening? She pressed. A flash of something that looked like it was half annoyance, half anger crossed Shikaka's face at the mention of Kakashi. I'll explain things later, he answered. Stay here, I need to talk to the guard. He made a move to head towards his destination when he was stopped with a tug from below. Hey daddy, guess what? The Jounin paused mid-stride and turned to his son who had a hold on his pant leg. Hey buddy, I can't talk right now. Just wait a minute, okay? The youngest Nara frowned as if the idea of being put off was ridiculous as long as he hadn't thought of it. No. Don't wanna wait. Gonna tell now. Shikamaru, his mother said hesitantly, I don't think this is the best time. Why don't you wait till later? No, he insisted. Now. Shikaka sighed and gave in but not before Yoshino heard a nearly indistinct really troublesome escape his mouth. He knelt down to his son's level and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. What is it, little guy? I need you to make this quick. Shikamaru gave his father a small innocent smile. Guess what? Mama says Nara-chan's my little brother. If you had asked her beforehand what she would have expected her husband's reaction to such a statement would be, Yoshino would honestly have been unsure, but she would have given several options. 1. He might laugh it off. 2. He might raise an eyebrow and ask for more details. 3. He might roll his eyes and say, how troublesome, with a hint of laughter in his voice and creeping smile on his lips. Maybe something else. But never would she have thought that Shikamaru's announcement would cause Shikaku to pale slightly, to take in a small gasp, to grip his son so tightly that he started to complain about the pain. Yoshino's anxiety factor was suddenly much higher. Listen to me, Shika-chan, the Jounin said urgently and swallowed with difficulty. That's not true. Naruto can't be he stopped and ran a hand down his face. Shit, he swore and stood back up, pointing a finger at his wife as he walked away and commanded once again but with more force this time, stay there. Mama? Shikamaru turned to his mother with a confused look on his face. He had thought Daddy would like what he had said, but something about it was wrong. Yoshino knelt down and silently wrapped her son in a hug. Both watched as their husband and father stood across from the A&BU guard and started having a whispered but heated conversation. Naruto sat on the ground between them and at one point looked up to the two men, but he quickly lost interest and went back to doing whatever, though she noticed that he had started to suck his thumb again. Suddenly the masked shinobi held a pointed kunai in his hands. Shikaka! The black-haired woman screamed with a hand to her mouth, before she realized that her husband wasn't being attacked. The A&BU, however, was now fully alert and at the ready, standing closer to Naruto than ever before and looking around. Shikaka quickly made his way back over to his family and spent a few seconds comforting them, but was quickly giving out orders again. Yoshino, listen to me. I need you and Shikamaru to get away from here and stay away for a good while. I don't care where you go, as long as it's in the village. He paused. No, wait, Naruto lives in the center of the village, right? Don't go near there, but anywhere else is fine. Keep your head down, and don't do anything that will draw attention to you or remind anyone that you've spent time with Naruto. Avoid all ninja, but if you have to trust anyone it would be NBU. They're the Hokage's chosen, so they should be in the loop, but don't count on it. Can you do that? Not SPO said to go out. Shikamaru spoke up and pointed out helpfully. Kakanizan says. This time Shikaka's face displayed pure anger at the name. That damn copy brat can go fuck himself for all I care. The bastard put my family in danger and didn't tell me one damn thing about it. Yoshino didn't even bother reprimanding her husband for swearing so heavily in front of their son. She was too busy feeling guilty at his words about keeping things from him when she had done the same for a whole year. The fact that she had been planning to reveal herself before did nothing to lessen her guilt. Shikaku, she said quietly, I think we need to talk. When I get back. About things. Shikaka looked at her wordlessly for a moment, and seemed to understand a little as she glanced at the blonde toddler before he answered. Okay. It's alright. Just go, and don't come back for at least a couple hours. Yoshino stood and picked Shikamaru up in her arms. It would be faster than letting him walk, and speed seemed to be of the essence today. Still unsure about how upset her husband would be later with her, and whether or not she would even have a husband to come home to, she searched Shikaka's eyes for an answer and tried to inject as much feeling into her voice as she could. I love you. His face softened, and he reached down to give her a much deeper kiss this time. I love you too. Don't worry, it will be alright, he reassured her. Love you too, Daddy, Shikamaru joined in, feeling it must be important. His parents smiled, although it was slightly strained, and then Yoshino turned to walk away. The young boy put his chin on his mother's shoulder and lazily waved to his playmate, calling out, Bye-bye, Nara-chan, before he wrapped his arms around her neck and closed his eyes. Yoshino's back was turned to Naruto as she walked down the road, so she didn't see the watery blue eyes that watched them leave, but she definitely heard the crying. His wails tugged at her motherly heartstrings, and despite herself she looked back just as she turned the corner, hoping to see someone comforting him. Instead, Shikaku's expression was hardened as he merely stared at the upset child from several yards away, and the ANBU ignored the cries. With no understanding of what was going on, all Yoshino could do was keep walking, leaving with a sense of foreboding that caused her to hug her son tighter. Ha! Ha! Ha yeah! Damn it! Kakashi swore as he dodged to the left, barely avoiding Guy's insane high-speed kick. He blocked another with his right arm and made a move into the opening that appeared, but Guy was ready for it, and Kakashi was forced to back off. Kakashi slid to a halt several yards away as both men paused, reassessing the other's weak points now that they had battled it out for a while. They were breathing harder and doing their best to conceal it, but other than that there wasn't much to exploit. Guy had a few nicks on his arm where Kakashi had barely grazed him with shuriken and kunai, and the silver-haired teen could feel a bruise forming on his side from a kick he hadn't managed to dodge. Still, either jounin would allow such simple injuries slow them down. In a moment Kakashi made his move. This time it was the green-clad shinobi who was on the defensive, as he underestimated his sparring partner's first attempt and attacked, only to find that a kawarimi no jutsu had been performed, a large log standing in his way. He quickly dropped to dodge the punch heading for the back of his head and made for a sweep to the Kapinin's legs, but the younger jounin flipped over him to avoid the attack and wasted no time in coming back. Even if Guy had been ready for the next barrage from the silver-haired shinobi, it would have done him no good, as he realized the extent to which he had underestimated Kakashi. He had thought the Kapinin was unconsciously holding back a little from the worry he had displayed earlier, and so Guy, too, had kept some of his power in reserve, thinking that his comrade was distracted enough not to take the contest seriously. Too late he was realizing how stupid that was. For one, the taijutsu shinobi knew that Kakashi always took their contests seriously, no matter how much he protested against them. For another, he had seen this pattern in Kakashi's fighting style before. He wouldn't use his full abilities until he was confident that he had the upper hand. It wasn't that Guy couldn't have fought back at all had he been prepared. He knew exactly how to stop every one of the younger teen's attacks, and did, but he was always a second behind, still defending himself from the last kick just as another punch or kunai was aimed in his direction, and that 1 second was what could cost the ninja his life and left the older jounin unable to counterattack. Guy knew he was losing. He could see it, and he was just beginning to recognize that all his defending was wearing him out faster than it was Kakashi. Still, there was no way in hell that he would insult his friend by backing down and giving up. He was ready to fight to the end, when it happened. XXXXX. Kakashi was about to give the finishing blow. From the beginning he had seen that Guy was using less than his full potential and had planned to exploit it, but somehow it hadn't worked out quite the way he wanted. His head was all over the place, starting with his worry for Naruto. It startled him because he had never been concerned about anyone like this before, including Rin. Whenever thoughts that Naruto might not be safe came into his head, his whole body would freeze for a split moment and rebel, as if it wanted to turn around and run as fast as it could towards the village whether Kakashi consented or not. Then he would get everything back under control and somehow finish what he was doing, be it defensive or offensive. On top of that, as infrequently as he had come to this field, he hadn't actually fought on it since his team began to fall apart. It wasn't as if images of Obito were superimposed over Guy or anything, but even though it had been years since the two had actually had any kind of confrontation, Kakashi kept finding himself reacting to an attack as if it would be much weaker, or a different form. Gradually, though, he forced himself to work through it, to concentrate, to forget about the past or the future and focus on right now. He imagined it was like some kind of intense hands-on therapy that would have had his psych evaluation doctor spitting out all sorts of medical jargon, but all Kakashi cared about was that it meant he would be able to fight Guy on an equal level. Finally he had worked himself up to his normal level of combat, and attacked with everything he had. Guy wasn't prepared, and Kakashi was beating him down, although to the fuzzy-eyebrowed man's credit he never gave up and made the Kapinin fight for all he was worth to the very end. He was about to finish it with a combination move starting with a powerful kick when it happened. Kakashi-san! The voice was far off, enough that, had this been any other day, he probably would have been too involved in the fight to hear it, or recognize his name, or just ignored it altogether. Instead he turned his head slightly, and his attack slowed a fraction. He had enough time to notice a black figure jumping towards them out of the corner of his eye before Guy, who hadn't heard the cry, blocked the kick with his hands and was able to come around with 3 fast ones of his own to Kakashi's chest that sent him flying. The copy slammed into the ground and dust went flying as he slid back several yards. Shit! He heard Guy's voice over the ringing in his ears from hitting his head. Kakashi, are you okay? I thought you would be guarding. I did not realize you were not paying attention. Kakashi waved the older jounin off as he stepped closer. I'm fine. I don't think I have a concussion, just hit my head, and no broken ribs, so it's okay. A hand went to his forehead. Ow. Alright, so maybe it hurts a little. Suddenly a cat-shaped masked face was shoved into his own and a hand roughly grabbed his chin and pushed his headband up, tilting his head back and forth before the ANB realized the futility of checking the pupil of the foreign Sharingan against that of Kakashi's own normal eye. Damn, well, you better hope you're alright, kid. You don't have any time to waste. Sorry, Kakashi said to the man as he blinked in uncertainty, but I'm not sure I follow. Naruto's in danger, the man said briskly. The jounin's breath caught in his throat at the news and his chest tightened. He tried to listen to the rest of the message before he dashed off without any information and made things worse, but it wasn't easy. That bastard Danzo finally found out about the kid and he's using it to try and overthrow Hokage-sama again. By the time we found out he had managed a secret gathering, it was too late. There's now a very angry mob of shinobi that want to lynch the Taik. Sandaime is ordering them to stand down, but worst case scenario we have a civil war on our hands. Hokage-sama wants you back home doing your job, kid, so we can focus on ours. Kakashi had stopped hearing what the masked man said after lynch the Taik and his mind began running frantically, but instead of making everything clear for the copy he was freezing up. As if on autopilot his body stood up, but after that he was lost and didn't move. Naruto, he choked out more to himself than anyone else, not him too. I have to keep him alive. Vaguely he was aware that Guy and the masked man were talking, maybe at him, maybe to each other, but the words didn't seem important. Move! He screamed at his body, move, but he could tell that he was losing it. Now of all times he couldn't keep himself together. His vision began to tunnel and images flashed through his head, first his father's corpse lying cold on the ground, then Rin's crying face, the dying Yondaime, and the bloody image of Obito, standing in this same training field. The dream, Kakashi remembered with a start, it's that dream. A strangled and hysterical laugh was wrenched from his lips. Is this what you meant, Obito? Is this what you were trying to tell me? The image only stared at him. This must be fate. I'm not meant to save them, am I? I'll never make it in time. After all, I'm just less than worthless. Suddenly the image of Obito scowled at him in disapproval. You still can't see the things you should be looking at, can you? Damn it, are you even listening? You have to leave. Kakashi, go! The yell snapped him back, the dead Uchiha's face disappearing as Kakashi realized who was speaking the words from the dream in his place. Guy was practically toe-to-toe with him, shouting in his face and probably ready to punch him too. Guy, what dash? Look, I don't know what's going on in your head, or what is really happening with Naruto even, but you have to snap out of it now. There is still time for you to head back. The older jounin gave Kakashi a shove in the direction of the village, and it seemed to shake the copy out of his stupor. I need to head back, see if the situation's gotten any worse, spoke up the ANB when he thought the jounin had gotten himself together enough that he could follow orders, and with that he was off in a blur of motion. Right, said the silver-haired teen as he made to go with the masked man, but after a moment turned to his comrade instead. Thanks for he tried to stutter out something quickly with little success and some discomfort. No problem, Guy smiled as he held out a thumbs up. I've always got your back, rival. Something twisted inside the copy-nin's chest, but the urgency of the situation left little time for examination. Instead he gave a nod to the fuzzy-eyed-browed man and shot off into the distance. Just hang on, Naruto. I swear I won't let you down. Just hang on. In the 6 decades Sarutobi had lived through, he had seen and experienced a lot. He had felt joy and pain, love and hate. He had seen children be born and watched others grow old and die. He had grieved over friends he had lost in battle and celebrated at the accomplishments of academy students. He had been rescued by those he wouldn't have thought trustworthy and betrayed by those he would have entrusted his life to. He had seen strong militaries fall at the hands of their enemies and small villages rise up against their leaders. He had watched sacrifice for others and sacrifice for self. Yet out of all of this only Orochimaru's deception had left him more disappointed than the actions of the man standing before him and those who had left the meeting with hate in their intentions. Danzo, you are a fool. The Hokage spoke softly, but his voice was strong and full of anger as it reverberated around the empty meeting hall. At his side stood a team of 3 ANB guards, the only ones who could be spared to back him up as the others went around town carrying out his orders. Danzo himself was flanked mostly by a few low-level chunin, but Sarutobi recognized the face of at least one jounin. All of his flunkies had cocky grins that clearly showed their confidence in this latest scheme of Danzo's. Sandaime suspected that many of them had been promised some type of reward if his plans came to fruition. My dear Hokage, the one-armed man replied with much sarcasm, I do believe it is not I who is the fool. What on earth did you think would happen if you hid something like this from the people? Now that the secret is out, everyone will see that you are not fit to be the ruler of this village. A Hokage is no ruler, Danzo, he is a leader, which is why you will never become one. I have no intention of explaining my reasoning to you. You wouldn't begin to understand what I hope to accomplish, and would only twist my words for your own purposes. A smile crept over the bandaged face. Me twist your words? Have you lost your mind as well as your power? I no longer need to do any such thing. The people will do it for me. You may have kept the loyalty of some of your soldiers, Sarutobi, but the trust from the village as a whole will vanish. The short, brown-haired Black Ops soldier wearing a tiger mask to the Sandame's right bristled. You will respect the Hokage, traitor, and refer to him by his title. Sarutobi held out his hand to keep the young man from taking his anger too far. If the Anbu had a fault, it was that they were sometimes excessive in their loyalty. The principal may have been right. The more people stopped respecting the title of Hokage, the less power he had, and the harder it would become to rectify the situation, which Danzo undoubtedly knew, but the masked soldier had taken the insubordination personally. That was exactly what the bandaged man was hoping for. Not only would it not intimidate him in the least, he would use any physical attack on him to prove that the older man's power and influence was so little he couldn't even control his own hand-picked Black Ops. If Danzo was disappointed that the shinobi was held back, he didn't show it. In fact, he laughed. Title? And how long do you think your precious Sandame will hold on to his title? He endangered the entire village with his secrets and planning. That boy should never have existed longer than the few seconds it would take to pull a kunai out after the Kyuubi was sealed inside him. The fact that he lives among us is completely reckless, and as you have seen, I am not the only one who feels this way. Don't spout your lies at me, Sarutobi scowled. You have no interest in keeping this village safe. Your first priority is to gain my position, and you will say or do whatever it takes to attain it. Had the Kyuubi never existed, you would have grasped at the next best thing. Danzo shrugged and leaned forward on his cane. I care little for matters that could have happened. What's important is the tools I have before me, and you, my dear Sarutobi, have provided me with an excellent one. He lowered his voice and his expression changed to one of utter seriousness. I will become the Hokage, old man. No matter what it takes, or how long. If that abomination is to be the sacrifice on my way to ruler of Konoha, then so be it. Sarutobi would never let anyone in the room see it, including his own men, but inside he was shaking with fury. Had he thought killing the one-armed man would have helped the situation, he might have acted upon his impulse. Instead, the Sandame was forced to settle for the last word as his enemy walked by him on his way across the meeting hall towards the door. On my life, Danzo, I will never allow you to become Hokage, or to touch that child. I would still have that much influence with the council at least, even if I were stripped of my title. And if I do lose my position, I will go through this entire village to keep Naruto safe if I have to. I swear it. The ex-shinobi ignored the older man and continued on, but his entourage was apparently still primed for a fight as one of them purposely bumped into the same hot-blooded Anbu that had spoken up before. To the boy's credit, he didn't lose complete control and attack the man, but Sarutobi was still thankful that his captain had the presence of mind to grab his subordinate's arm before all hell broke out. For a moment there was a standoff as the tiger-masked shinobi stared down his officer. The rat-faced captain held his ground, and with a jerk the team member tore his arm free and backed off. As the last Chunin walked out the door, the Hokage noticed a cat-masked Black Ops soldier slip in and make his way over. Sarutobi was eager for his report, but before he could ask, the rat interrupted him. Hokage-sama, I don't mean to question your motives or your words, but our jobs will be a lot easier if this isn't suddenly sprung on us at the last minute. The empty black eye sockets of the mask bore into the Sandame, as the gray-haired captain pressed him. Were you serious about what you just said? Whoa. The long, black ponytail of the cat whipped around as he looked at his teammates. Did I miss something big? We ain't talking war yet, are we? The last member of the squad answered, a woman with shoulder-length red hair and the unfortunate luck of a fox mask. Hokage-sama has just sworn his life to protect the vessel. Her words were stiff, almost robotic and monotone, but she somehow managed to convey a level of disapproval that showed just how much she thought of that plan. He's not just a vessel. The tiger bit out as he faced his teammates. He's the son of the Yondaime. You should respect that. Chill, shorty. The cat raised a hand to cut him off before he could begin to rant. We don't have time to argue semantics. Your answer, Hokage-sama? Asked their captain, dutifully ignoring the others as they argued. Such a common occurrence would not deter him from getting his answer. Sarutobi looked straight into the eyes of the mask to convey his seriousness, although he had to tilt his head up slightly to do so. My words are never to be taken lightly in a situation like this, Captain. I have confidence that we can avoid much of the conflict that will undoubtedly occur if we do not handle things carefully. But I am not as big a fool as Danzo thinks. I was aware that this day might come, though I did not expect that man to be the instigator. An oversight on my part. Yet I do not wish for Naruto to become a martyr. The Hokage's eyes softened with sadness as he continued. The Yondaime sacrificed what was most precious to him to save his people. It was never his intention to have the people shun the boy. The least we can do is to make sure his son survives as he wished, even if it means Naruto must live far from his birthplace. When he finished his speech, the captain paused for a moment before bowing his head. Very well. My team is at your disposal, sir. If it comes to the removal of the boy, you may rest assured that we will do all we can to assist you. Sarutobi nodded his head in thanks and made to move for the doorway. It was time to head into the village to do what damage control he could. NBU teams had been sent out to try and keep the men and women who had left the meeting from raising too much of a fuss, but mob mentality was hard to predict and even harder to control, not to mention the fact that there weren't nearly enough teams to cover every shinobi who would be bringing the news to the villagers. Sandane himself wasn't even sure of exactly what he would be able to do once he got out into the midst of things, but his first step was to examine the situation. Damn, but doesn't this suck, commented the cat with a sigh as he fell into place next to the tiger and behind the Hokage. His captain walked to the right of the village leader, while the red-headed fox stepped to his left as they continued down the hall. No matter what happens, we're gonna end up fighting our comrades. It's a shame people are only talking about the Kyuubi. Yandame-sama was a good man, and I've seen his kid, poor thing wouldn't hurt a fly. The fox looked back to give her black-haired teammate a reprimanding glance for presuming to talk so much while on duty. Sarutobi was used to cats lacking discipline, however, and didn't mind so much, as the ANBU soldier was very good about protocol when the situation really required it. I actually hope we can keep any discussion away from the topic of the Yandame. So far Danzo has only angered the village against the child who has done nothing more than exist, but I fear he may try to vilify the boy's father. If that happens, things may really get beyond our control. A dead man can't persuade anyone to change their mind. He didn't bother mentioning his personal desire that Naruto grow up, at the very least not blaming his father. But if the entire village destroyed the previous Hokage's reputation, there was no way the lone victim of his heroics would respect him. How did it go at the training grounds? The Hokage asked the cat, changing the subject. I assume Kakashi is well on his way to the Naras. Well, yeah, he is, but the ANBU soldier seemed to struggle with something before he continued. Hokage-sama, you sure the kid was the best choice for guardian? When I told him what was going on, he froze up, and I keep wondering if I really should have left him to go for it on his own. Just doesn't seem like he's ready for this at all. His shorter teammate was completely incredulous at this statement. Are you seriously questioning the Hokage's decision? He started to wave his arms around to emphasize his point. Sandame-sama only has Naruto-san's best interest in mind, not to mention his years of experience with commanding his true. Look you, growled the ponytailed ANBU as he made an attempt to still the younger man's arms by twisting them behind his back. Sarutobi smiled distractedly as the rat commander sharply reprimanded the two men. Comradeship came in many forms, and as much as they fought each other off the battlefield, there was no question that the cat and the tiger fought side by side better than many other teams. Cat has made a valid point, the red-headed fox continued the conversation. The guardian is a shinobi and as such should have expected these threats. What else did he think we were guarding the vessel for? It might be beneficial to consider a more experienced jounin or ANBU to handle the situation. I don't believe that unexpectedness was quite the reason for Kakashi's distress, answered Sarutobi before the discussion could get out of hand. They had reached the last staircase leading to the ground floor, and he could see two more ANBU waiting to give reports along with a serious-looking group of chunin and jounin behind them. You have never really met him before, but don't be so quick to discount his ability. I have faith that he will pull through for the boy. The trip back to the village took an eternity. Kakashi was nearly certain that the entire town had moved a few kilometers farther away than when he had left it, and his frustration wasn't helped by the fact that even the closest entrance forced him to run around in a somewhat parabolic curve instead of a straight line towards Naruto. To make up for it, he ran across rooftops whenever he could rather than take the convoluted streets and pathways that led up to the North District. Still, with no information about what was going on or who he might encounter, he couldn't really do any specific planning beyond preparing himself for anything. This left him open to thinking about other things, mainly Yoshino's words that morning. Shikaku said he would try to come home for lunch if he got out of that big meeting they were calling everyone for today, so you two are welcome to join us after your training. He had gotten careless, the copy Nin realized. He was supposed to protect Naruto from dangers like this, but since up until now no one had known about the Kyuubi, the biggest threat to the toddler's safety had been his own antics and curiosity. Kakashi had begun to trust Shikaku and Yoshino because they had both treated the toddler as if he were one of their own, but he had forgotten that they might not be so welcoming when they found out the secrets being hidden from them. The jounin guessed that a part of him assumed he would always be there with Naruto when the Naras discovered everything. There were a half a dozen other errors that the copy Nin could have pointed out to himself, but he was getting closer to his destination, and he had to focus, to be ready in case he would be entering a hostile situation. As he ran, he took in his surroundings, checking to see how the crowds were acting. He was no good to Naruto if he got caught in a mob of angry chunin and jounin, but the area seemed fairly clear. There were groups of people going about their daily business, all civilians and all with smiles on their faces and friendly greetings on their lips. Danzo may have told the others that Naruto was the Kyuubi vessel, but Naruto wasn't actually a prominent figure in the village, which gave him and his guards the advantage of being able to hide him in plain sight. Kakashi's neighbors and maybe even some of those living near the Naras knew his name, but that was the extent of his fame. Many didn't even remember that the Yandame had a son, and Kakashi wasn't about to declare the information publicly. Someone would eventually figure out who the Kyuubi vessel was, but it would take some time. The most immediate threat came from those who were aware of Naruto's identity. Kakashi sped up, leaping across a market street, and zigzagged across a few neighborhoods. He had almost reached Yoshino's house when he heard a noise that sent his heart racing. From somewhere up ahead, a child was crying loudly in a way that Kakashi recognized as desperate and confused. There was no way he could be sure it was Naruto, but under the assumption that it was, he would have to prepare for the worst. While tears meant the 1-year-old was alive, Yoshino would never have let him get so upset. The Jounin speed up and prayed that he would make it in time. As he crested the roof of the last house, Kakashi glanced at the scene before him and, without thinking too much, took action. Shikaku, kunai in hand, was leaning down towards the wailing Naruto. Raging fury and a sting of fear overtook him as he jumped down, drawing his own weapons as he did so. "Get away from him, you bastard!" he roared, landing in front of the shadow user and using an upward slash that, had it connected, would have sliced through the man's vest and chest, creating a nasty wound. Shikaku managed to block it with a startled look on his face, and the copy pressed his advantage. If the older Jounin expected him to back off because they had gotten along well before, he was sorely mistaken. Kakashi fully intended to kill the man for going after Naruto, comrade or not. The silver-haired ninja brought his fist around and Shikaku tried to pull his head back but was too late. The blow connected with the older man's face full on and he fell back, pain clouding his thoughts as blood streamed down from a broken nose. Just as he landed on the ground and his vision cleared, the other Jounin's image loomed above him, his eyes full of hate. Kakashi was straddled across him, his left hand pressing the shadow user's right arm with the kunai into the grass. Shikaku cursed himself as blood began running down his throat and choking him. When he realized what the younger Jounin was doing, he had intended to manipulate his shadow, but in this position that was impossible. Knowing there was nothing left to do, he waited for the blow and tried not to breathe in too much blood as Kakashi raised his kunai, ready to finish his senior comrade off. The copynin was so focused on Shikaku that he had forgotten about the constant protection detail that came with the blonde toddler's presence, and never noticed the ANBU guard in the yard with them. The kick came to his right side, just above where Guy had gotten him earlier. While it wasn't nearly as strong as the taijutsuists, it was powerful enough to knock him off the older man. This time he was able to keep from hitting the ground too hard and he used one arm to protect the rest of his body. Shikaku could be heard trying to cough up the blood from the back of his throat as he sat up. Thinking the shadow user might still have his guard down, and not wanting to take on two high-ranked shinobi at the same time if he could help it, Kakashi stood up quickly. As he did so, a wave of pain and vertigo overtook him and he nearly fell down again. He briefly wondered if the cat-masked soldier had been right to question if he had a concussion but ignored it in favor of the battle in front of him. Unfortunately, his few seconds of weakness had cost him dearly, and with growing horror he realized that he couldn't move. He was unable to look down, but staring straight ahead at a badger mask and the hard face of Shikaku who was glaring at him, he could see that one shadow was facing the wrong direction. "Now what?" asked the green-haired ANBU soldier, as they stood glaring at the younger Jounin. His masked face turned towards the toddler who had witnessed the entire thing. Naruto had managed to push himself up to his feet and was unsteadily walking toward them, arms outstretched. Tears were still streaming down his face, and his snot was doing a pretty good imitation of Shikaku's bloody nose. However, instead of the wailing that he had been putting all his energy into before, the blonde was only sobbing with an intermittent ka, breaking it up. "Stay back, Naruto. Don't come any closer," Kakashi cried, unable to prevent the panic in his voice. He could move his right eye around to watch the toddler out of the corner of it, and prayed that the boy would stop. But Naruto could only see that his guardian had returned for him, and kept waddling in their direction. "Well?" The badger pressed Shikaku even as he moved to stand in the path of the blue-eyed boy, effectively cutting Kakashi off from his charge even if he could move. "Now I get some revenge," bit out the Jounin. "No!" Kakashi's whole body shivered as he strained against his invisible bonds. "Damn it," he thought. "If I could only move. Just a little. I just need to stop them. Please, just move." To the copynin's surprise, instead of moving towards Naruto with his kunai ready, Shikaku holstered the weapon and took a step forward. His shadow technique was advanced enough that Kakashi wasn't forced to follow his movements forward, but the younger Jounin was surprised to see the shadow user pull his own arm back as he came nearer. "What the hell are you doing?" called out the Black Ops soldier, apparently just as surprised and not expecting this turn of events. "What the hell is he doing?" Kakashi echoed the question in his mind. Even if he hadn't been made to move as Shikaku had, if the older Jounin did anything to hurt the copynin, it would be reciprocated. "Dumbass," Shikaku ground out as he stopped close enough to reach Kakashi, and read the question in the younger Jounin's eyes. "You think just because it's not complete I don't have full control over my own technique?" Suddenly, at the same time he released the shadows, he punched the teen in the side of the face. For the third time in less than half an hour Kakashi was sent flying, but the black-haired man remained uninjured. "How the fuck can you call yourself a shinobi?" shouted the ANBU. "Don't do that. Don't hurt him more than you have to. If he gets injured too badly then he's useless as a guardian." The badger-masked man was completely ignored as the shadow user raged on. "If we had really been after Naruto's head he would have been dead by now, thanks to your stupidity. Not only did you not notice the second man, you left Naruto wide open for an attack. You should have stayed by his side the moment you pushed me away. Those are fucking genuine mistakes, Kakashi. Aren't you supposed to be one of the best? Why the hell are you acting like an academy dropout? Kakashi tried to push himself up as he listened to the older man, but nearly fell down again as he got to his feet. He began to realize why it was so hard to stay upright. Not now, he thought as he tried to push the pain in his torso down. I've taken hits from Guy before. I've been through worse. I have to focus only on getting Naruto out of here. But the Jounin knew the truth was that Guy hadn't gotten an unguarded hit on him since they were kids. He had never been someone to take lightly as a taijutsuist, but even more so now that the energetic man was older, more experienced, and at least twice as strong. Shikaku was oblivious to the Kapinin's pain. There was no question he was pissed about the Kyuubi. Having the thing that nearly killed him a year and a half ago so close to his wife and only son without being told of the danger they were in had made him livid to the point that half of his trip back home had been filled with thoughts of taking the son of a bitch out. It was while he was imagining the hundreds of ways he could torture the demon that he realized he would have to slip his kunai through the ribcage of a blonde-haired, wide-eyed infant he had rocked to sleep only 3 weeks ago when Yoshino had been busy. He would have to snap the neck of the laughing 1-year-old that he had tickled to fits along with his son. He would have to strangle the life out of the baby who had smiled up at him and greeted him as he walked through the door 1 year ago. All just to get revenge on Demon Naruto was too young to refuse having sealed inside of him. That was the moment the dots all connected. The mysterious death of the Yondaime. The reason Naruto was always guarded. The Sandaime's attempt to keep everything hidden for as long as possible. The Yondaime had sealed the Kyuubi in his own son. The hero of Konoha had sacrificed his life and his family so that no one else would have to suffer. He had never asked more of the village members than he was willing to give up himself. Shikaku knew, without any thought, that he would have never been able to do the same thing with Shikamaru and that the Yondaime, good man that he was, would have felt the same. Yet he had pushed aside his feelings as a father, risked the life of his newborn child to save the villagers, probably hoping and praying with everything he had that someone would see the human that he would have loved and cared for had the blonde man survived rather than the monster he locked away with his own hands. That was what the current Hokage had been trying to nurture. That was what Kakashi was trying to protect. They had done it too. Naruto was a good kid, anyone could see that. Shikaku had tried to measure his anger again and found that he was still furious. But there was no way he would be able to hurt the human to get to the demon. Even if that weren't the case, now that he knew what the Yondaime, a man Shikaku respected for working a hell of a lot harder than he would ever care to and for being a damn good ninja rather than just a political figure, had done, the shadow user felt he had to respect the late Hokage's wish for life. But Kakashi was ready to screw the whole thing up. The kid was supposed to be a freaking genius, had definitely been faced with battle situations and hostage situations, and still managed to lose his head and attack wildly. That wasn't the way a Jounin, hell, that wasn't the way a Chunin was trained to react. Shikaku grabbed the younger man by his vest as he wobbled unsteadily to his feet and shook him a little. If you're going to have the balls to put my wife and my son in danger, then you better have the ability to back it up. What if someone had gotten to them first? Well, kid, what would you have? 3 well-aimed shuriken nearly sliced the skin off both his and Kakashi's nose as they passed through the space between their faces and embedded themselves in a nearby tree. The older Jounin instinctively pushed the Kapinin back to avoid them, but the silver-haired teen was oddly unresponsive, breathing heavily and stumbling back in an awkward position. That's enough, demanded the ANBU guard from where he stood, still standing next to a weeping Naruto. The toddler had stumbled and fallen in his attempt to reach Kakashi, sitting awkwardly in the grass. Snot and tears still streaked down his face, and having much of his fist in his mouth, instead of just a thumb, muffled the shortened version of the Kapinin's name. Whether the masked soldier noticed any of this, or rather whether he cared about it or not, never showed in his body language. Instead he held a handful of shuriken that were no doubt ready to be launched in the Jounin's direction should they continue their fight. Shikaku-san, I know that you're angry. You have every right to be. But Naruto is under Kakashi-san's care, and beating the shit out of him isn't going to help any of us. Kakashi-san, Shikaku-san is right. I get that you haven't needed to use it in a while, but that's no excuse to ignore all your training and experience. The ANBU man waited for acknowledgement that common sense had reawakened in the other two. Shikaku gave a non-committal grunt, which seemed to be good enough for the special ops soldier, but to the green-haired man's annoyance the teen didn't answer, instead wrapping an arm around his stomach and clutching his side. Kakashi-san,